American volunteer Benjamin Linder is blaming the U.S. government for his son's death last month in Nicaragua. Today, Dr. David Linder took his claim before the Congress. David French reports.
Dr. Linder called his son's death murder.
This was an ambush, not a chance encounter. It was murder. I consider the United States government and its effectors, the Contras, guilty of this crime. It was not an accident, but the result of the United States foreign policy.
One of the chief architects of that policy, Assistant Secretary of State Elliott Abrams, held up a map showing that the northern province of Nicaragua, where Linder had been working for 5 days, was the country's heaviest combat zone.
This hearing will serve an extremely useful purpose and may save lives if it gets the word out that the U.S. government cannot protect U.S. citizens as they travel in combat areas overseas.
Benjamin Linder was doing volunteer rural electrification work, his parents said. A volunteer American nurse in Nicaragua helped dress Linder's body for burial.
When we saw Ben's body, it was obvious that he had not been killed by a grenade because there was a bullet hole in the side of his head.
Florida Congressman Connie Match criticized the Linders for using grief to publicize the point of view that U.S. policy in Nicaragua is wrong.
I don't want to be tough on you, but I really feel that you've asked for it. I think that you're being here, today. It's been less than 3 weeks since your son died.
That was about the most cruel thing you could have said.
I don't consider it cruel. I consider it to be to the point.
Linder is the first of an estimated 200 American volunteers working in Nicaragua to be killed. 7 European volunteers have been slain in the 5-year war against the leftist Sandinista regime. David French, CNN, Capitol Hill.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. I am Michael Brooks, and we are broadcasting from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where left is best, as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Yo.
Chief economist David Grissom.
How's it going?
How was that?
Pretty good. Nice and slow.
Barry White of socialism right here. We're inaugurating a new segment, Daily Show Gone Bad, where we talk about various alums of The Daily Show doing bad work. What is his name? Hassan
Minhaj.
Hassan Minhaj. Horrible take on Brazil. We're going to break that down. Plus, we have a shout-out. Unions refuse to unload a ship of weapons heading to Yemen from Saudi Arabia. Incredible act of solidarity. And another shout-out. Notorious B.I.G. would have been 47 years old today. And we want to honor him and talk a little bit about Ready to Die. It is a genuinely iconic album. We have a gem with David Grissom. We have a clip of Joe Biden talking about cutting Medicare and Social Security. We have Brandon Sutton in here in studio of The Discourse. It's an incredible podcast. And we're going to be talking about the limits of Wonkery. Wonkery won't save us. Nerdism won't save us. And how it applies to understanding Pod Save America, Elizabeth Warren, and Nate Silver. Plus, in the postgame, Evo Morales is running for a 4th term. It was Ho Chi Minh, would have been Ho Chi Minh's birthday and Malcolm X's birthday. So we have some throwback clips to honor both men. And we have a debunk, which is the social democracy only works in a homogenous culture or country with Ben Burgess. And in the post game, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to show you what we're going to do pretty soon, but we're eating this Fiesta bucket. We're making good on our promise, which is why we have an esteemed friend and patron in studio tonight. He wanted to come in here and watch us suffer. He couldn't have come in on a nice night. He's like, no, I definitely want to come in on the night where you will be gagging on the Jim Baker Siesta bucket. That was, of course,
Fiesta bucket,
excuse me, not a siesta bucket. It's a Fiesta bucket that will make me take a siesta tomorrow. Sorry, Matt, you're going to have to come in. Jim Baker, come on TMBS. Thank you to our friend, Ronald Reagan. But first, we have to talk about anti-imperialism, a green military, and why this election really matters. You know, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have both put forward some excellent policy ideas. Elizabeth Warren has put forward a lot of excellent domestic policy ideas. And as we know, she has a very good progressive record with things like taking on the credit card industry that Joe Biden has been a bagman for his entire career. But we also know that Tulsi Gabbard, who I certainly have my criticisms of, but I won't highlight them in this moment, she's been willing to take some very brave and significant stands on the national security state, on war and peace. But there's only one candidate in this race, and I'll just say right out of the gate, because it's important to be clear about this. He's been wrong on drones at times. I want him to clarify his position. He's been wrong on the Middle East at times, and various votes that he's cast. But there is only one candidate who has a consistent anti-imperialist position, from protesting the war in Vietnam to doing the lead work in Congress, even as he runs for president, even as he puts Medicare for all on the table, even as he reshapes modern politics and builds a grassroots movement unlike any other modern campaign. He's fighting against the U.S.-enabled and backed genocide in Yemen right now, speaking out on Iran and speaking out against U.S. interference in Venezuela. In the 1980s, he was absolutely right to fight the Reagan administration's policies of backing death squads and juntas in Latin and Central America. Elizabeth Warren has actually shown a very troubling counter tendency that we're going to get to in a moment. But let's start with the New York Times attempt on this sort of embarrassing hatchet job on Bernie Sanders that has happened this past week. The piece focused on the most shallow and embarrassing, ahistorical, and frankly immoral way you could focus on responding to Reagan-era policy imaginable. It focused on whether or not Bernie Sanders traveling to Nicaragua in opposition to the United States funding death squads, also complicit in cocaine trafficking and all sorts of other serious crimes, that there was a chant of death to Yankees. And as Bernie Sanders, mostly with incredible patience, explained to this reporter who has no regard or interest in Nicaraguan history or lives, that usually when a country is getting interfered with by another, let alone a superpower, and people are dying and villages are getting burned down and their autonomy and self-determination as a people is being compromised, usually they don't like that. So he was there primarily to oppose what we were doing versus getting offended by a slogan. While the U.S. was ramping up its imperial ambitions in Nicaragua, Bernie was using his position as a local politician to oppose deadly U.S. intervention, not only in Nicaragua, but also Cuba, and also to do, and yes, this is an incredibly good thing. It was a good, by the way, it was a thing that in the 1980s was becoming mainstream, citizen diplomacy with the Soviet Union. And while his citizen diplomacy was grassroots, it's important to remember that even arch-conservative Ronald Reagan was sitting in summits with Mikhail Gorbachev and cutting our arsenals. This was an era of diplomatic openness, and Bernie was part of it, rightly. And it also matters because, of course, the United States continues to be an imperialist nation, and deconstructing this is central to any left project, even if you have the luxury. And believe me, it is a luxury, because if you vote in the United States, your vote registers across the globe. You're not voting in Norway. Our policy affects every single inch of this planet. So you cannot separate it from the well-being of the rest of the planet. Now compare this with Elizabeth Warren's new plan to deploy a green military. Now, some people think that this is a brilliant political tactic, and I got to introduce some historical awareness first. One, this has a very long precedent. In the Bush administration, the Global Business Network put out a report that was commissioned by the Pentagon that identified climate as a serious national security challenge. The Pentagon has been ahead of other branches of government in using sustainable energy and understanding the threat that climate poses. The Pentagon is a practical agency in some effects and in some respects, and needs to be aware of practical and real things. So they have been ahead of intransigent Congress and, of course, the corporate sector. And Thomas Friedman, he wrote a book on where he actually, in fact, used the phrase Green New Deal. He talked a lot about the military. The idea that you could triangulate a climate message by appealing to U.S. militarism is nothing new, and I think it's quite unfortunate that Elizabeth Warren has embraced it. This is her tweet. Climate change is real. It's worsening by the day, and it's undermining our military readiness. More and more accomplishing the mission depends on our ability to continue operations in the face of flood, drought, wildfires, desertification, and extreme cold. Senior military leaders have warned Congress of the national security challenge that climate change poses. The military is taking steps to become more energy efficient and resilient. But instead of meeting this threat head on, Washington is ignoring it and making it worse. Today, I'm introducing my Climate Resilience and Readiness Act to harden the U.S. military against the threat posed by climate change and to leverage its used energy footprint as part of our climate solution. Now, the plan requires the Pentagon to achieve net zero carbon emissions by all non-combat bases and infrastructure by 2030. It fines contractors who haven't achieved zero carbon emissions, and the proceeds go into energy and climate resiliency fund. And she's right to target the military for its damage to the climate, but reducing emissions could be achieved much more effectively by drastically slashing the military budget itself and using those resources to recalibrate what the United States does in the world and reinvest in global clean energy outside of a military context. There's no doubt that military R&D has played a huge role in technological development in our culture, in our country, in our economy. Fundamentally, if you have a certain set of progressive values, that's a problem. You don't want to preside over that global infrastructure from Puerto Rico to the Middle East. Now, this is also matters because Elizabeth Warren has voted for all three of Donald Trump's military budgets, including one in 2017 where John McCain, who was then head of the Armed Services Committee, actually gave the Trump administration more than they asked for in military spending. I think undoubtedly that some of this has to do with the fact that Elizabeth Warren represents Massachusetts, where Raytheon and other major sort of resources go into defense spending and research. I think that this is part of a green postmodern version of butter at home, guns abroad. Bernie Sanders has voted against all of Trump's military budgets. I will note, because people like to include her in the conversation, Tulsi Gabbard is much better than Elizabeth Warren. She's 2 against 1. She voted yes in the 2019 budget. There's also a policy problem in Warren's plan. As Carl Bayer points out in The Jacobin, the plan includes so many loopholes for the military that it's unlikely to be successful, and that the proliferation of fines will result in a higher military budget as contractors pass off the cost to government. There's exemptions in this bill that something can be, the requirement on efficiency can be waived if words like vital national security are implicated, as an example, which sound important and official and scientific, but they're subjective terms that will open up endless doors of bullshit in the process. Excuse my language. When it comes to curtailing militarism and imperialism, the history and differences between Warren and Sanders matter. Warren supports sanctions in Venezuela, which one study from CEPR suggests have led to 40,000 dead. Bernie opposes the sanctions. Jeff Merkley has brought forward a bill opposing U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. Warren is not a co-sponsor. Sanders is. And in Israel, where Bernie Sanders has slightly moved the ball forward on a humane, balanced policy there, which is in fact an affirmation of actual U.S. policy, ironically enough, until Trump. Warren has supported every single bit of military funding that Israel has demanded. And in 2014, in a time when Israel's savagery in Gaza was so extreme and obscene that even Joe Scarborough was criticizing the bombing of UN schools, Elizabeth Warren said the following: when Hamas puts rocket launchers next to hospitals, next to schools, they're using their civilian population to protect military assets. That's the Israeli position, and that's a green light to kill those civilian assets. By the way, it's not terribly dissimilar from what the Saudis say when they bomb hospitals and school buses. We're either going to have to stop conducting things like that, conducting operations like that, whether it's the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, or whoever, or we're not. This is Bernie Sanders injecting a little bit of humanity into the Middle East conversation in 2016.
Believe it was. And let me say something else. Let me say something else. As somebody who is 100% pro-Israel, in the long run, and this is not going to be easy, God only knows, but in the long run, if we are ever going to bring peace to that region which has seen so much hatred and so much war, we are going to have to treat the Palestinian people with respect and dignity. So one is not to say that right now in Gaza, unemployment is somewhere around 40%.
So that's Bernie Sanders talking about that. Contrast that with what Warren had said. The North Korea talks. Yes, of course, Donald Trump is ludicrous. Of course, there's dangers in those talks. But those conversations were absolutely the right thing to take place. And it was the convenient, dangerous, and ludicrous position of many in the Democratic and media establishment to oppose those talks and adopt the most hawkish and extreme stance towards the Korean Peninsula and undermine the incredible diplomatic efforts of South Korea's President Moon. That was the stance of Chuck Schumer and Rachel Maddow. Warren was with them. Sanders was with Moon. In Iran, 2017, Sanders was the only member of the Democratic caucus to vote against an Iran sanctions package. All the rest voted for it, undermining the Iran deal, helping set the stage for where we're at today. This is Bernie Sanders earlier today, in addition to all the other things he's doing, speaking clearly about what a catastrophe an attack on Iran would be.
Let me be very brief and say that I think, as most Americans know, way back when we were lied to about the situation in Vietnam, and we went into a war which ended up costing us 59,000 lives based on a lie. 2003, we were lied to in terms of Iraq supposedly having weapons of mass destruction. We lost over 4,000 brave Americans, and hundreds of thousands of people in the region were killed and forced to leave their homes. I believe that a war with Iran would be an absolute disaster, far worse than the war with Iraq. And I hope the American people tell this administration that we will not go to war in Iran. And intentionally or unintentionally, we can create a situation in which a war will take place. And let me tell you, I think when you do that, you're talking about a war that will go on and on and on. And I hope that the Congress does everything it can to remind this president about the Constitution of the United States. Sometimes we forget it, but some of us learned in school that it is the Congress that determines whether or not this country goes to war and not the president of the United States.
Bernie stood in solidarity with the Sandinistas in the 1980s. That was the right position. He opposed the Reagan administration's backing of coups, juntas, and death squads. Bernie has relationships with progressive leaders like Evo Morales and Jeremy Corbyn. He invited Fernando Haddad, along with Yanis Varoufakis and progressive leaders from across the world, to Burlington to talk about globally coordinating against neoliberalism and fascism. He's talked a serious approach to dealing with global climate crisis and oligarchy and understands things in those global terms. He's spoken out. He needs to do more, but he's mentioned the imprisonment of Lula. Warren has said nothing. He's done these things. Bernie is not perfect, and no president is perfect. And any president No matter who it is, we're going to need to speak, organize, and agitate. But without any doubt, a left project won't work that is not driven by solidarity and an entirely different relationship to empire and power. There's no way to end the debt relationships to the Caribbean, the crime of those relationships, to stop a war with Iran, or deal in any coherent way with the climate crisis without structural changes in our military and foreign policy. Sanders represents an opportunity for an anti-imperialistic turn, and it's the only turn we can make if we hope to survive going forward. You guys got anything else on that?
Just going through the history of Bernie Sanders' positions, I think it's important to recognize that, while he has his own good moral vision, a lot of his correct positions have come from the fact that he comes from a left socialist tradition.
Right.
And that is why it's so important to support somebody like Bernie Sanders, because they're looking outside of just the United States, which just is politically, easy to do at the moment, and rather trying to build those networks. So when we're talking about having a relationship with Evo Morales, or even talking about, relationships with Brazil or Jeremy Corbyn, that's exactly the kind of organizations that we need to be doing to dealing with the crisis of today, because the crises that we face are not national crises. They're international. And you need somebody with that kind of perspective to push for what we need, and you're just not going to get that from a kind of more like centrist liberal understanding of the world.
Not at all. You'll get the same replication of the imperial vision from them, and I think Warren has definitely some understandings about tax shelter, about trade agreements, which are great, but there's nothing in her record. She absolutely does not understand this other dimension at all. And I also just want to be clear here too, and please, my God, I take a deep breath when you hear this. I'm going to continue giving Tulsi props. I love what she said. Edward Snowden should be pardoned. She would drop charges related to WikiLeaks disclosures about Julian Assange, again, about WikiLeaks disclosures. I support that. I agree with her. She's been right on Venezuela. But the argument she's making is more analogous to a left isolationist argument. It is not an internationalist one. The only person in this race who has any concept of how his struggle here is linked to Evo's struggle in Bolivia, is linked to why Lula's in a prison, is linked to what Corbyn is trying to do, how Africa policy needs to be about canceling debt, in that, in fact, we take more resources by far out than we put in. There's only one person, both, as you say, because of his history and because of his context. Who else is going to have a conversation with someone like Fernando Haddad or Evo Morales and understand those contexts and synchronicities? And it matters a lot more because this is the President of the United States. So that it is a distinct argument that's not represented by anybody else in the race.
And the coalition that Bernie's building, the people who are supporting him and putting him into potentially into this position of power, will be the kind of people who will keep him straight if he starts to stray. Versus a Warren situation, while she could win on a liberal ticket, but there's not necessarily that kind of grassroots organization that has an in to her administration.
There's a context, right? Absolutely. And there's also a context to pressure her on domestic. There's no context to pressure her elsewhere. Matt. All right, double shout out.
Let's get to the shout out. Creepy. Shout out. Weird.
You have the camera on David Grissom.
It's incredible.
Come on, David, do your thing.
This is crazy.
There you go.
Bless me, Father, if I have sinned.
This is out of control. Weird.
Hello.
Weird. Crazy. This is crazy. This is out of control. This is weird.
We appreciate it very much, Tim Apple.
We appreciate it very much, DJ Danarchy. Thank you, the sonic genius behind the TMBS experience. So the first shout out are unions in Genoa, Italy. And I'm going to read from a piece in Reuters. Italian unions refused on Monday to load electricity generators onto a Saudi Arabian ship with weapons on board in a protest against the war in Yemen. The Bahri Yanbu vessel loaded arms in the Belgian city of Antwerp earlier this month, but was prevented from picking up another consignment of weapons in the French port of Le Havre following protests by humanitarian groups. Rights campaigners say the weapons contravene a UN treaty because they might be used against children in Yemen, where a Saudi-led military coalition is battling Iran-backed Houthis in a war that has killed thousands. If I was in a fact-checking mood, that sentence would jump out. Houthis are an organic group. They're more backed by Iran now after mass murder from the U.S. and the Saudis going back to 2015. But back to this story. Unions in Genoa tried to have the boat banned from Italy, but the ship docked just after dawn, met by a handful of protesters. And it goes on to say, we will not be complicit in what is happening in Yemen, union leaders said in a statement. Port officials confirmed the generators were blocked the other day on the quay, but said that non-critical goods would be loaded. So this is a great example of exactly the types of global solidarity that, as an example, Irish unions were involved in when they were refusing to stock goods from South Africa and supermarkets and places in Ireland during the struggle against apartheid, when they were in solidarity with the African National Congress struggling to overturn that barbarism, and unions in South Africa who refused to unload weapons going to Mugabe when he was unleashing violence against opposition politicians and labor unions years ago. And of course, unions across Europe and across Africa and across Asia and across the United States who've intervened on behalf of workers elsewhere, but also great humanitarian catastrophes, as well as great century-defining crimes like what the United States, the Saudis, the Emirates, and the United Kingdom are doing in Yemen today. So shout out to Italian unions, people of Genoa with that activism. That's a beacon of light moving forward for the world. Second shout out. Notorious B.I.G. would be 47 years old today had he lived. He was murdered in 1997 in Los Angeles. And I think, I don't want to say because I don't know if I understand the 1990s, even having listened to the album. But I do know that sometimes there's events or cultural artifacts, pieces of music, books, where you can't understand the time without it. And I love all of Notorious B.I.G.'s music. And I'm, totally fit into that category. He's one of the only people that if he's, if that's your pick for best rapper of all time, you get no argument from me. Ready to Die is fascinating to me because especially now when you go and you kind of read back about the 1990s, or you look at like the Joseph Stiglitz book, the Roaring 90s or whatever, you have this vision of like, oh, it was all just Bill Clinton and a stock bubble and everybody was living in good times, all of this sense of prosperity. But if you go and you were listening to an album like Ready to Die, that was a very clear articulation that was absolutely not how everybody was living in the 1990s. People were living out the full conclusions of course, the history of American racism, the segregation of cities, Robert Moses, housing projects, but also just the 80s, Reaganomics, the extreme starving of the underclass and hyper-militarization of police, almost like paramilitary approach of police. And then, of course, the other thing, and this is so frustrating to me that when people go like, oh, rap was so materialistic, it was like, well, why wouldn't rap reflect every other aspect of American culture? The 80s and 90s are incredibly materialistic, and America and capitalism are materialistic. So, of course, there's going to be enormous poverty and strife, and then also huge aspiration. Also, the album's incredibly fun. It's like so painful and so fun, and the dude had an unbelievable amount of charisma. This is some footage of Notorious B.I.G. of Biggie freestyling in the 90s. I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure. Actually, I can't make the joke I was about to make because I was going to say this place is like a yogurt shop now, but it's not. I actually walked by it. I still think it's the same place, but it might as well be a yogurt shop. 17 years old. That dude had so much charisma. It's like insane. So, listen to understand the 90s. That's part of my pitch, but you should listen regardless. Felt very weird to be poor in the 90s. I remember that growing up, having this perception from like the news and television that like everybody was rich. Being like, I'm not. And then you could listen to albums like that, and it's like, oh yeah, but I'm not dealing with racism. I'm in a neighborhood that's, totally safe. So I'm not dealing with any of that either. But on the other hand, I was like, yeah, right. I'm glad to hear that other people are occasionally getting their lights turned out.
It's a little bit later than the 90s, but I always think MTV Cribs, when we look back on our period in time and, income and wealth inequality, and then you see this TV show where everyone's just like, look at these massive houses people live in, that as if that wasn't going to make people conscious, like, oh, some people have it really well off in a way that like people that aren't that wealthy haven't been able to see ever in history before.
I think two quick things. One, look up Dave Chappelle's MTV Cribs. That's one of the funniest sketches I've ever seen in my life, where he's like, he has like his like endangered species panda fur coat, and Hulk Hogan personally choked the panda out for him. And then he's like a lot of ballers, they got their own shoe closets, and they got their Jordans. But I said, I cut out the middleman. Fuck that. I got my own sweatshop. And he opens the door, and these Vietnamese women are stitching, and he speaks Vietnamese and threatens to turn them over to INS. That was, and then on the other hand, though, I think shows like that were so devious, not consciously, but on an ideological level, because athletes and musicians and stuff are like, those are the people that people resent least for their wealth, because at least they're giving something back to us. I think if you went and did like MTV Cribs with like, and that was when I covered up the Bhopal spill and got a great payout day, and this is my crib.
Oh man,
I think that would really piss people off.
Like capitalist criminal.
Yeah,
cribs.
imagine like you go to like Ken Langone's crib, like found at Home Depot, and a giant fucking prick in Long Island. Like, you would be like,
every one of them would have like, oh, that you don't go into that room.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Maybe Bernie would have gotten ahead 10 years earlier. All right, let's do a little bit of a pitch, and then we will get to the gem. So first I want to say, guys, we're off next week. But we will have certainly new shows for patrons, obviously. And we're going to release on iTunes an audio version of the LA Live show if you want to watch the video, which is really, really well produced.
It's very, very well done.
Very well done. Become a patron. And if you want an unbelievable amount of illicit histories of Turkish, Jamaican, Brazilian, Burkina Faso politics, idea primers, dealing with everybody from Mark Fisher to CLR James, we're creating a resource that I'm incredibly proud of in terms of people's ability to understand and navigate what's happening in the world, politically, economically, culturally, ecologically, and with that very global, that real perspective in the commentary, the building blocks of that.
I have a question about that.
Yeah,
so we're creating that database for the illicits.
Yeah.
I think there's a way in Google, and maybe the people who are working on that know it better than I, but that you can actually map things, so you can have like a world map, and that'd be interesting to be able to like click a country and see which episodes we've done on.
That's an amazing idea.
I wonder if
at the very least the continent. I think that's something we should look at. That's a really good idea. But I mean, also, we've done. I mean, at this point, we've done deep dives on France, the European Union, Iran. And in the coming months, we'll be doing more on China, India, Pakistan, and all of the We've done a lot in South Africa, but we're going to do stuff on Nigeria and Kenya. And the post games are really fun. We're having a great time. Become a patron, patreon.com/TMBS. If you want to tonight, if you're a patron, you can watch us eat the Fiesta bucket. David, will you come? Can we get that up on camera? Can we see the Fiesta bucket? You can watch us, and of course, we take your Discord questions. You're on the Discord community. We take your calls sometimes. We do a lot if you're a patron. But tonight, we're eating this bad boy to celebrate crossing 2,000 patrons. Do the side, the incredibly depressing warning about a baby not drowning in it. Could you imagine?
Yeah, imagine having your kid die.
Your kid die
the
because
last thing they have is
that's
Fiesta Pail.
So depressing. Because of the fucking Fiesta Pail. So, become a patron.
Actually,
yes.
I can't believe they call it the Fiesta Pail instead of the Fiesta Bucket. Pail just sounds so much more unappetizing.
I know.
Than bucket.
They really should go with. They should go with bucket instead of pail.
It says children can fall into bucket and drown. Keep children away from bucket with even a small amount of liquid. Yeah, that's all it says.
No, it's good. I'm glad to see Jim Baker having such best business practices. When we get to 3,000 patrons, I'm sorry, guys. We'll think of something fun, but no, we're not doing anything. This is just horrible. But we're doing it for you. Patreon.com/TMBS. August 24th. Can you get this up on screen, David? We've had two shows where we've packed audiences in Brooklyn and Los Angeles. We've had incredible times. And now we're hitting the Midwest. Midwest Left is Best Fest.
Left is Best Fest Midwest.
Left is Best Fest Midwest. We're incredibly excited to be in the Windy City, August 24th, Lincoln Hall. Get your tickets. Get a VIP ticket. Come hang out with us for a couple of hours before. People have so much fun. Thank you. Some people brought us gifts in LA, and I want to say thank you again. I feel a little uncomfortable. I don't think we're more than just happy to see you without anything else, but it's incredibly kind when people do that.
And we really need to pack this out. My mom is coming up from Texas for this, so we need to have a packed house.
All right, guys, you hear it.
Yeah, buy them today.
Go buy your tickets.
Get them now, folks.
There's a link. We'll tweet them out. We have that link up on the website, but we'll be tweeting them out regularly. There's a link up there for patrons as well, obviously. We want to see you in Chicago. We'll see you in the Heartland. Get your tickets today. Become a patron today, patreon.com/TMBS. Spread the word. If you're watching this, we'll cross 50,000 subscribers on YouTube relatively soon. So for whatever reason you haven't clicked yet on that subscribe, I don't know what you're doing. Do it. Let people know. Appreciate all of you. Thanks so much. It's time for the gem. The Grissom Economic Minute. We have some music, I think, actually. I was just sent some music for some of these segments. So we might be testing out some new Grissom Economic Minute tunes pretty soon.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Dad.
Well,
Thank you.
What kind of
Why did you say I like how
you
said? I like how you did. You were very. Sometimes you kind of get into like, not exactly morning zoo mode, but kind of like you're like the traffic guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you get a little bit. I'm like, all right, well, we might, maybe I do too. Maybe like, we might have some new music for you, David. And you're just like, oh, well, looking forward to listening to that, Michael. Thank you so much. Here's your capitalist weather forecast for the coming.
I love the fans.
Ideological hegemony.
I love the fans, but most of the fan art has been me getting my head cut off. So I'm always a little nervous when I hear there's new content with me and
Fair enough.
coming up.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so let's talk about some funky stuff that's going on. So we've talked a lot about stock buybacks, and 2019 is no exception to this rule. In the first quarter of this year, 86% of firms in the S&P 500 that have reported their results so far, 86% of them have been involved in stock buybacks. They've repurchased a total of $188 billion worth of their own stock. And this is just of companies that have reported. So there's some who are still sort of coming in. Right. Meanwhile, while a lot of these corporations are coming back and buying their own stocks, investors are getting a bit worried. Just recently, investors have pulled $14 billion from U.S. mutual and exchange-traded funds. And we're really seeing more and more that the stock buybacks are coming from the top companies. So we're seeing the top 20 companies accounted for 42% of all buybacks. And as we've talked about before, this is one of those tensions where we are sold this idea that you cut taxes on these major corporations, you lower their burden, and that money will come back to working people. But we've seen that has not been the case. In fact, with all this windfall that people have gotten from this massive tax giveaway, it's all coming back into trying to buoy their stock prices. And this is going to become a bit of an issue when, not only does this mean that, workers are not getting higher wages, but it is one of these tendencies that Marx wrote about, which in Engels especially, that more and more you see capital trying to move away as far away from production as possible. So the idea is like they want to be able to move away as if production isn't even happening. They just want to be able to make money by flipping money. So while this is going on, that we're seeing this massive increase in
long way from Engels' dad at the mill.
Yeah, exactly.
Standing inside the mill,
Having
personally overseeing the abuse of the workers.
Yeah, versus like these the E-Trade commercials
versus
where people are on their iPad and
people,
managing all their assets.
Right. Or more to the point, at a Goldman terminal, like orchestrating like a fraudulent deal in Malaysia that is wiping out a sovereign wealth fund in a place that potentially, if you weren't the deal maker, you very well never even visited.
Mm-hmm. But, so as we're seeing this, where more and more people are, even though the signs of the economy, you would think that it is strong, more and more people are saying that they don't think that the economy is working for them, that it really is working for the elites. We're seeing these kind of stock buybacks, which are buoying the market. We've seen a lot of volatility recently. And this is quite worrying because while there's this cascading exuberance of stock buybacks that buoys the market, though these prices are not immune to the recent spurts of volatility, there are really significant threats below the surface. Leveraged lending, which are loans to companies with outstanding debt, bad credit ratings, etc., increased by 20% in 2018, totaling $1.1 trillion. This exceeds the peak levels of 2007 and 2014. And beyond these highly risky debts, corporate debt has now exceeded $9 trillion. So with debt levels rising for companies with poor credit ratings and high levels of debt, declines in the economy, which we're seeing, there's been a lot of spurts in the past couple of months on the stock market trading, could result in a massive debt crunch with significant players unable to meet their obligations. And because these debts are held by lots of different people, they're held in mutual funds or collateralized loan obligations, the massive amounts of corporate debt could sink large sectors of the economy quickly if these debts go bad, much like what happened in 2008. In the past couple of, the past few months, we've seen just large ups and downs on the stock market. We're seeing more and more people start to say that this is going to become the new normal, where there is like a lot of doubt about the future of the economy, especially with these ongoing trade fiasco with China that's going on, which is giving a lot of people, not having too much confidence in the market. You're seeing more and more people are starting to trade on the VIX rate, which is Wall Street's fear gauge. If anyone's interested, I wrote a piece in Counterpunch in February 2018 on this called Living in the Capitalist Casino. But basically, this is something that measures sort of like the movements of the stock market. And it's one of those things, though, because as more and more it becomes a financialized commodity, the less accurate it is to measuring the economy, sort of like when you're on camera, you start to change your behavior. So there's a lot of interesting things that are going on. Unfortunately, not too many of them good. And even, the Federal Reserve has warned about, the dangers of corporate debt. There are a lot of people who are worried about the continuing of stock buybacks. And the question will be, do we continue living in an era of cheap money, which has really let the economy grow, but in a way where the fundamentals aren't necessarily that strong.
Absolutely. So that sounds great to me. I don't know how it would sound to Richard Wolff as an example, but I just want to say, and I won't reveal too many details, obviously, but our friend visiting us tonight, who's a patron and allows the show to happen, is someone who works in finance. I don't even know if he's listening to me talk, actually. And I just want to know, you could just give me, as far as David's grasp of economics, could you just give me a thumbs up or down? Oh, I was not actually expecting that. Oh my God. Actually, I should have known. You're Uchiwali. You're a problem creator. Let me come to my boy's defense. What do you it's because you're a capitalist. No. Oh, well,
I got it.
Okay, you're reading. Okay, so Dean Baker is apparently someone who's is Dean Baker bullish on the economy?
No, he says that the debt isn't big enough, that stock market so high.
Is this picking up any of this on mic? Because I was going to say this is actually this is kind of great. This is actually like a point counterpoint to the whole segment, David. You can respond. So Dean Baker says, "Well, wait, no, just repeat this to me because actually this is cool because you can debunk this right in real time, David." I can just read it on mic if you want. You want to read it on mic? All right, come read it on mic. Read it on mic, and while you're doing it, you remember Shaq? Remember how Shaq asked Kobe how his ass tasted? Say that to David. say how my ass tastes, David. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to YouTube.
Is my mic on?
Yeah.
Turn my headphones up, man. Turn my headphones.
Yeah, turn my headphones up. Wait.
Turn my headphones up, man. Turn my headphones up.
All right. So okay, we have a little real live, totally unplanned, unprompted debate. Wait here. Go ahead. I'm gonna do something. No.
Okay.
Go ahead. Now say what Dean Baker did.
Push the button or not?
You don't push the button. I took you off button. So just read Dean Baker. David, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. This honestly I do feel very Howard Sternish right now, but I was not expecting to provoke this month. I honestly thought he was just going to give you a thumbs up. And we're going to move on.
I am a liberal. Don't forget that. I'm very, very, very far to the left.
It's beautifully literal.
I love Bernie Sanders. So
and Dean Baker.
The first point he makes is that companies took in large amount of debts for a simple reason: it was cheap. So he thinks it'll be easy to pay back. He thinks that the interest rates are too low. As a result, many entirely healthy companies have large amounts of long-term debt on which they have very low interest payments. The ratio of corporate debt service payments to after-tax profits is at a relatively low, as in the opposite of high level. That's his first point.
I mean, so yes, there is the reason that the debts have increased is because the interest rates are so low. So I definitely agree with that. But the fact is that the debts have grown at such an exceptional rate, including debts, as we were talking about these, leverage debts, which is $1.1 trillion, that are quite risky. So that is something that if there does, so let's say like interest rates.
Hold on, sorry. Matt, will you let Brandon in? Okay, go ahead.
So if interest rates do start rising and you start to see a little bit of a crunch on the economy because so much of the growth in the economy has been buoyed from the fact that there's been cheap money without a lot of actual changes in the productive nature of the economy, then you could be in a situation where people have, corporations have large debt levels, they're unable to pay them, and then because, the financial community has become so tied to these debts themselves that you could get into a situation where you would be, in a lot of danger. I mean, I absolutely agree, though, that this is a function of the fact that there's low interest rates in the U.S., and I think that they definitely need to be raised. But the problem is that we kept interest rates low to try to buoy an economy that didn't have any structural fundamental change to it after the financial crisis.
Wow. So do you still like Dean Baker better than David?
He's got 3 points. The second point.
Oh, my God. All right. Well, we might have to just do... All right, we're gonna have to,
really quick.
We're gonna have to speed this process up a little bit. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the second one we already mentioned is that stock prices are very high right now. He thinks they can pay the debt back by simply selling stock. And the third and final reason is corporate debt does not pose the same problem as mortgage debt did because even in a bankruptcy, debtors usually collect the bulk of their debt. It's rare for a company facing bankruptcy not to still own valuable assets such as a profitable subsidiary or land or buildings that could be sold.
By the way, I love that. That's such a great shade right there. Yep. That's Dean's second point.
I mean, yes, certainly, you can sell stock if you need to raise money. I mean, that's the point of that. I mean, initially that was the point of creating the stock market, but. I mean, I don't know why he's assuming that the stock prices are going to continue to be high. I mean, I think it's much more likely that they would go down significantly.
He specifically
says... So all this money that these corporations have loaned out to buy their own stock, right, now is basically lost, right, because it's just been lost on the market. So I don't understand why that wouldn't necessarily be something that we shouldn't be worried about.
Well, I mean, we'll have to keep it quick, but he does say that he thinks they can do it even if the stock market goes down 50%.
Because does he think that they're getting them at such a value right now?
Well, that the interest, the debt on the interest, the interest on the debt is so low.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't understand why it doesn't create a problem.
And the last thing he says,
like, I don't know. I just like, it's like if we're exposed to like, massive debt levels, and then, we have to have a massive sell-offs that we're buoyed off of massive debt levels. I don't just see why that's not just a ridiculous waste of capital. I mean, just an unbelievable waste of 10 years.
All right, everybody, that's been a spirited, rigorous debate. We're running out of time.
I think this is an intellectual curiosity expedition.
Wait, was there a third point? You are an esteemed patron.
Last point
what you should do when you fucking learn the business properly, David, is you just go like this. Whoa, I'm sorry, I never thought of that, sir. Dean Baker is a brilliant guy. I stand corrected. Dean Baker is actually good.
He is good.
I do have to say.
Tomorrow's news today.
The last point is finally, corporate debt will not have the same sort of feedback story as was the case with mortgage debt in the housing market. If GE finds that it can't make its debt payments, not my bet, but the issue raised in the article he's reviewing where he brings this up, it will not make it more difficult for a software company or an airline to make their interest payments.
Well, wait, can I just say, though, I have a little bit of I have a touch of a gripe, though.
Okay.
Because I wanted you to challenge David from your own perspective because you're a financial professional, not outsource your argument
I'm an
to
IT
Dean
professional
Baker.
Who's a whore. There's a difference.
Whatever.
And you'd be surprised. There's some fairly liberal people at work.
Oh no, I'm not talking about. I'm talking just your expertise.
Okay.
I'm talking your expertise, not your politics.
Okay.
All right, David, answer the final thing.
I lost the train. Wait, the third point is that it's
if
not
a
the
company,
same as
if GE goes under it. I mean, if a homeowner goes under, it has effects on the community. If GE goes under, that's not going to affect Microsoft, and that's not going to affect Delta Airlines.
I don't know if that's necessarily
I don't know about
true.
that. Sounds
I
very,
mean, it's
that
not,
actually.
Well, I mean, he's not saying goes under, but he's saying if they have trouble meeting their debts, right? If they're running,
but the problem with the financial crisis wasn't necessarily like the collapse of people getting evicted from their homes. It was the fact that so much of the financial economy was tied to these loans that they basically stopped lending to each other overnight. So if we're talking about, the financial institutions are holding, $1.1 trillion and what they expect to be, debt obligation payments to them, and those dry up overnight, like what happened with the mortgage crisis, then that will create a financial crisis, which might be different from like those companies going under.
All right, so that was it's been a spirited debate, but we got almost, it's sort of like when you get your first hand job, you're excited, but you can't wait for it to end. All right, that's going to be a wrap. That was Chris Matthews. You don't even know the proper impersonations.
Sorry, I don't know.
No, Grissom would be. I think Grissom would be. No, Stern would be like. You think Richard Wolff gets a lot of chicks? God, I bet those old communists, man, they were out there in the communes. I bet they got so many chicks. All right, thank you. We will. I double. Yeah, no, this is perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank
Grissom
you for
Economic Showdown.
Grissom Economic Showdown with a patron.
Yeah.
Yeah, just maybe a little bit more. Think of our structural economic incentives.
Need to get some Ennio Morricone music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Dean Baker's fourth point was, everything's all right, man. Don't worry about it. I'm just kidding.
All right, Dean Baker. Challenge. Great.
We create some actual... by the way, I think the number on the sanctions from Venezuela, I believe, is from Dean Baker's outfit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, center budget priorities. Yeah, that's Baker and Weisbrot. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Matt, actually, I realize that there's two pieces of sound that I think we need up there that I don't. I know we have that and we have the Biden thing, but there's also we had a Pod Save America thing too. But we'll figure it out. Can we figure it out while we take a brief? We're going to take a brief break, and then really one of my favorite guests, and everybody's my favorite guest because we only have the best people on the show, and I am not being ironic or doing a Trump impression. I literally think that's true. We have the great Brandon Sutton. He hosts a show called The Discourse, And, you know, we all have really limited time. I'll say, look, you know what? Yes, if somebody's a guest on this show, I am listening to, reading, or watching their stuff. That is true. But Brandon's, I'm heavy into the discourse. It's awesome. People should become a patron. They should subscribe to it on iTunes. And I'm excited that he's coming back here. So we're going to take, and he's also at Pretty Bad Lefty on Twitter. We're going to take a brief break, and we're going to be right back with him on The Michael Brooks Show.
Somebody's going to have to explain the whole Fox deal to me.
Just make sure you do it well and you do it with passion.
Hashtag me too.
And you don't, Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is the esteemed friend and colleague of ours, Brandon Sutton, host of The Discourse at Pretty Bad Lefty on Twitter. Thanks for being here.
It is always a pleasure, Michael.
How's it going?
I'm doing great. You know, just came from the gym. I actually had to skip triceps today just to be here.
Well, I am honored.
I cheated the weight just for you.
I am so honored. Now, do you have like a list of shows that you'd skip triceps for? And I'm hoping it's a really small list.
Yeah, it's a small list. It's basically this one.
Right.
Sam Cedar, the Majority Report, and the Flat Earth podcast. I would skip leg day for the Flat Earth podcast.
That's amazing.
I have so many questions.
You are super into Flat Earth. We've talked about this before. What is tell me about the passion for Flat Earth?
It makes no sense. But I mean that, okay, so obviously the Earth is not flat. I'm gonna foreground that.
But foreground.
But
I love you. Like, you're so good at just like expressing your like savvy without reminding. Like, a lot of people have PhDs are not able to pretend that they don't have a PhD, which is, I think, a good thing. I think you shouldn't always make obvious that you have a PhD, which maybe just because I don't have one, I resent them. But when you say foregrounding, that is such a giveaway of your academic pedigree.
Technically, I'm only a PhD candidate. And I'm foregrounding it because I don't want to play the skeptic. I don't want people to go, oh yeah, no, he's just pretending like he doesn't believe. But what I find so fascinating about it, because there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. You know, there's reptiles are controlling the earth. There is Saddam Hussein's a time-traveling wizard. There's Bigfoot. There's a lot of,
I really want to hear about Saddam Hussein as a time-traveling wizard. That one I want to hear about.
That one is amazing. But, when it comes to flat earth theory, and as opposed to other sort of conspiracy theories about the world, there really is no geopolitical implications for it. It's like, if the earth was in fact flat and everything was the same, science would be different, obviously. Like, science would have to resolve that gravity, the sun, the heliocentric model of the universe. But like, everything else would be the same. In certain ways, like, it's just secret knowledge for secret knowledge. Like, if tomorrow, like someone went back in time and changed the world so we never believed the earth was actually round, like, how would your actual life change?
So this is really, first of all, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Guys, everything all right? Okay, everything's good? Okay.
I'm blowing your minds.
My mind is being blown. All right, no, sorry, finish. I did have something, but finish what you were saying. I just want to check with them.
And so it really is just secret knowledge for secret knowledge's sake, right? The only reason people believe, or rather at the core of the belief that the earth is flat, is that you as a person can go outside and, like, you're in a little sort of, with your five senses, mostly sight, look into the horizon and not be able to see the curvature. And from that point, you start working, like, it's backwards or forwards to go, okay, obviously everything I've been told about the shape of the world is a lie. But then who cares, right? It's just like, well, what effect does that have on your life as, like, Keith in Tennessee if the earth is in fact not round, other than it makes you feel as though you're privy to some kind of, like, secret knowledge about this global conspiracy involving NASA and, I don't know, Big Globe, Rand McNally, the Atlas makers. That's other than that, it's like.
Well, here's two things. I'll give you some pushback. I'll give you devil's advocate pushback in a second. But I do want to say first, I think this is one of the reasons that you and I think so similarly, because you and I foreground power and economics. So I think that there is a huge amount of people, including plenty of people watching and listening right now, who are just like, no, that's wrong, because if people don't know the nature of how the Earth works, then that's a catastrophe. And I am totally with you on. So look, I think it's obviously better if people, know how like the Earth works better. It's better that they know how it actually works than not. I'll stipulate that. But that being said, here's where I think because I don't care. I'm with you. Like I don't care. I don't care about that at all. And we'll get pushback from other people on that. I don't care. I'm with you. Where I think maybe it becomes a problem though is if you train your mind. It's like you develop certain muscles, certain habits of thinking, and so most of the other shit that comes on that continuum isn't harmless, right? Like if your trajectory is Earth is flat, it's a conspiracy. I guess you could either be like Kyrie and just be like, hey, leave me alone. I was 20 and on Twitter, and now I'm out of it. Cool, it doesn't matter. That's 100%. But if it means like, well, first they lied about this, and now they're lying about how the Jews control the banks.
The Jews are absolutely involved in keeping the Earth flat in people's minds. But like that's a part of the conspiracy. I don't know why. I don't know like what. But
because if they think if it's round, then it's scientifically proven, they'll pay that debts more quickly.
I don't want to get too deeply into this
because you opened the door, Brandon. But don't make the overture of an anti-Semitic joke unless you're willing to be doing. You ready? Repeat after me. The rent. You ready for some Shylock? You don't want to do any Shylock jokes, Brendan? Are you uncomfortable?
I don't want to be accused of doing tropes again. All I do is accuse me of being like doing tropes, and it
tropes are fun.
I'm sensitive. I don't need. I when I do my podcast, I keep a list of like slurs on my on up against my monitor, so I know which ones I'm allowed to say, which ones I'm not allowed to say. Like which ones are like sort of hard nose, which ones are soft nose, and which ones are just yeses, like red light, green light, yellow.
Yeah,
full BDSM.
I feel like that virtual list I have is basically like there's pretty much one word that's a hard no, and everything else is a lot of possibility.
Go for it. No, but I will say this: no one I agree with you. No one just believes the Earth is flat. No one there is no one person who that's their first foray into conspiracy theories.
Right.
Everyone starts with okay, well maybe the government is lying to us about fluoride in the water, or maybe 9/11 is a hoax.
Right.
And then by the time you get to I believe the Earth is flat, you also believe that vaccines aren't real, or there's some sort of government ploy. You believe
that one, and that's a good one. That one has some. So I will say, I've said this a million times, and I'm going to stop being ironic. My actual position on vaccines, I think that the science is as clear as it can be that it does not you should vaccinate your children, right? I find the skepticism about vaccines and why people see. I think this is the other difference. I'm much more sympathetic, I think, than a lot of people in my cohort as to why people have conspiracy theories, right? I think a lot, particularly in if I remember I read a study once from Rand that was African Americans are more likely to believe that HIV and AIDS are not connected and blah, blah, blah. And it's okay, you know what? That is probably a problem. This is also a community that literally had syphilis injected in them by the United States government. So maybe we should have a little bit of a context around this conversation instead of just well, that's a fact.
Even more so than that, I think that we live in an age of basically, we have the media, and I don't want to promote any other conspiracy theories. We have the media, and they're, and I think that our mainstream media, our corporate media is aimed at one very particular target, right? If you watch MSNBC, if you watch CNN, if you watch Fox News, I guess maybe Fox News casts a more,
Fox swims in those conspiracy waters.
But they have a target audience, and it's very easy to watch mainstream news and go okay, who are these people talking to, right? It's very easy to watch MSNBC for, 4, 5, 6 hours a day and never hear anything that resonates with you. It's very easy to listen to CNN for 5 hours a day, never hear anything that resonates with you. And I think if you look at flat earth theory, or if you look at anti-vaxxing, or if you look at who believes that Bigfoot is real, or, you know, in a vacuum.
Dean Baker,
or the guy who was right.
Dean Baker was interested in Bigfoot.
Or the guy who was running
what Dean Baker said, I'm sorry to interrupt, I just want to loop some things. Dean Baker actually said that part of the reason that even though he wanted tax repatriation to happen, that if that money stayed stashed in Ireland, that Bigfoot would retrieve it in the next counter-cyclical cycle. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I joked you meant the guy who was running against Olivia Munn's mother in Virginia, the Bigfoot porn guy. No one remembers the Bigfoot. No one remembers the Bigfoot. I feel like I'm going crazy. Not because no one Not because no one remembers him, but because it happened, and like he was just running for a Republican seat in Virginia. This was way before the blackface scandal, the 2 blackface scandals in Virginia. Virginia is known for their blackface and Bigfoot porn scandals, and
it's a terrible state.
And like he was writing. He was like a professional like Bigfoot erotica writer, like a la Chuck Tingle. He was writing his own fan fiction. He was like doing like
Bigfoot porn has become a major controversy in the U.S. House.
And so I was like, okay, cool, let's go, let's talk about this. And like 2 days, later, everyone was like, oh, dude, that's old news. I was like, have we become so jaded that a Republican lawmaker can be like writing Bigfoot erotica, and we're just like, oh yeah, tomorrow is it some other bullshit going on? But I will say that you're right. I think that it's not only sort of like individual subcommunities, individual subpopulations who are more prone to conspiratorial thinking because of a history of just marginalization or being, I guess the sort of popular term is gaslit by the media, etc. I think, for the most part, we live in an age of mass alienation where people are able to watch the news for hours a day and not hear any narratives that resonate with them. Right. And if you look at sort of like flat Earth theory, which is on the rise, more people are amenable to it. You look at sort of any sort of conspiracy theory in like a vacuum. These people are crazy. Like, oh, this is just anti-scientific thinking. This is anti-scientific logic. This is people who just haven't been paying attention in high school science. They should watch The Magic School Bus. Right. Of course they should.
They don't understand that science is awesome. Yeah. Like if you were at the level of, I agree, the psychic desperation to be searching out flat Earth stuff, like Bill Nye telling you you're an idiot is not going to help you.
Yeah, but I mean, then you loop in you loop an entire bucket of sort of anti-establishment thinking, right? Pale, yes. Because it's beyond the pale of
or it's in the pale that we're going to be eating later. Don't worry,
the pale of I'm still cutting for the summer. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you loop in climate change denial. You loop in other. You loop in the sort of weird pseudoscience of anti-abortion rights, and you loop in sort of even other kinds of I don't want to say fringe ideologies, but alternative narratives about the way the world works. Whether it be the neo-fascism on the far right, or sort of, I don't know, like the hardcore anarcho-primitivism on the hard left, and not to make sort of moral analogies to them, but I think largely speaking, we are a society where people are looking for alternative narratives to what we're being told, right? And so like we're seeing the rise of all sorts of anti-establishment thinking, and a lot of this is being not promoted, more so functioned or facilitated rather by the internet, and like people being able to find themselves a lot easier than they used to before. So inform sub communities and do this and sort of like propagate memes and such like that. But, it's something to pay attention to, right? Why do people feel the need to escape from traditional narratives about society? And I use traditional like in air quotes, and go towards more alternative narratives, and whether it'll be explicitly political, specifically engaged with the political economy of the world, like socialism or communism, or even you say fascism, right? Which I guess is it's sort of a pseudo explanation for why things are the way they are, or if they're just sort of totally escaping into this alternative reality of the Earth being flat and reptiles, sort of Obama being a reptile person, along with the secret Islamist.
No reptile ever moved like this on the basketball court.
I mean, I don't know. I saw Space Jam. So I'm going to see Space Jam too. But yes, I mean,
I think it actually has to. We just recorded a think tank episode for patrons where we talked about Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, and just that idea that like people's imaginations are totally collapsed, and there's so much constriction within capitalism, and not capitalism right now, even as not even necessarily as just like a raw reality of like this is the mode of how our economy works right now, and there's just there's material realities to how manufacturing works or currency trading or whatever, and that's all incredibly important. But that when you have such an ideological imprint, going back to Margaret Thatcher, of her saying there is no alternative, that shrinks the imaginative and intellectual capacity of what we can, going back to, and he quotes that quote that's overused but good from Frederick Jameson, that, it's easier to picture the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So I think that's another thing that's happening too, right? Is that you have this desperation to get out of these predicaments, but there are not. I mean, now I think the paradox is, I think there are other narratives that are emerging now that are, they're better than CNN and MSNBC. There's others that are worse. I mean, that's the paradox, right? Like, things are in flux and they're open in ways that could get even worse or get better. But one of the products of all of that sort of searching, even through like conspiracy, is because nothing has been opened. So you're going to have to find it wherever you can find it.
I mean, let's be honest. One of the things that empower conspiracy theorists, whether they be far-right conspiracy theorists or even like anti-science conspiracy theorists, is that people are aware, or rather, we put so many things in black box. We talk about the hegemony all the time, right? And just broadly speaking, the two hegemonic ideologies, despite what people want to say about liberal media hegemony, is neoliberalism. So we say the ideological foundation or narrative that supports capitalism, as opposed to capitalism, which I guess you could say is the economic system itself, right? To make the distinguishing, and the values that it imparts on people towards individualism, austerity, private sector values in the public sector. Then you say neoconservative.
Fragmentation.
Yeah, you say neoconservative, like as a general sort of term for racism, xenophobia, imperialism, American exceptionalism, Western exceptionalism, et cetera, et cetera. And when you say hegemony, it's basically what you're describing, right? It puts so many of those values in a black box and says it can't be anything else. It can't be, we can't question these things. Not even can we not question things, we can't even acknowledge that these things might not be the natural way things work, right? And so what that does when you have, and I'll use the current two parts that we have as an example, when you have MSNBC that comes out in 2016, 2015, or 2018, and they refuse to acknowledge capitalism as a destructive model for our society. All it does, not only do they refuse to acknowledge this destructive model, they refuse to acknowledge all but, let's say, the worst excesses of it, the worst excesses of capitalism, the worst, and they frame them as anomaly, as excesses, not functions, but anomalies. It allows people to come in, no matter where they're coming from, the left, the right, sort of like, I guess the tangential level, if you're talking about flat earth theory, and lift that veil of secrecy. And it empowers them by saying, hey, all I have to do, forget solutions. I have to point out a problem. I have to point out that things are not as good as you say they are. And, forget having some sort of deep material analysis of the world. Forget having a deep geopolitical analysis of history and of context and of the global north and global south and of the way sort of capital moves. No. I just got to say, hey, look around you. Right. And this is where flat earth theory is interesting to me, because it's a very experiential, it relies on a very experiential understanding of the world. It emphasizes that. People say it's irrational, which is, it's not necessarily irrational. It's experiential. It's based on your five senses, like what you can determine to be true about the world by just looking around. And so it says, hey, you know what? Look around you. You live in the middle of bullshit nowhere, Iowa. You drink ranch dressing by the gallon, according to Kristen Gillibrand. But like you're 40.
She's so bad, man.
You're 45. Hey, she's the lifting queen. She's the only one who's willing.
She's the only one who's willing to get out there and have a proper regimen. So we gotta give her props.
Beto's out there like live streaming his colonoscopy, and Kristen Gillibrand is sort of clean and pressing fucking 250 pounds like a champ.
Look, I'm sorry, if we're basing on fitness, we're gonna have to. Tulsi's the choice. Tulsi's definitely the fitness candidate.
I put this out there honestly. The first candidate to get up on the debate stage and just like deadlift 4 plates is the winner. You can't come back from that. It's not even that heavy. You can't come back from that. But let me just to finish my thought. It allows people to point out just very basic truths about people's experiences and sort of twist them into whatever they want them to be. You say, hey, you're a 45-year-old dingus living in Iowa. And
always Iowa with you.
I'm thinking about Iowa because it's it's the primary, it's the first primary state.
Okay,
forgive me. And like you go, you come out of your house, your neighborhood, it's not what it used to be, not like it was when you were a kid, when it was the 80s. Your kids, they went away to the University of Boise, then they moved to Seattle They moved to New York City. They moved to, I don't know, San Diego, not because they really wanted to, or if they did want to, it was more because sort of a material concern. Like, hey, you know, like, what are they going to do in Boise? I mean, what are they going to do in, you know, what are they going to do there? What are the jobs? Like, what can they really do?
In the Iowa town.
In Iowa town. Besides, I don't know.
Boise's growing. Boise's.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah,
there's all these places that you just, even if you wanted to stay where you grew up, you couldn't.
You can't.
There is an opportunity. Things are hollowed out.
Yeah, and a lot of times we focus on sort of the movement of capital from the global south to the global north, right? The exfiltration or the extraction of wealth and talent, you know, the sort of like the pressures that exist in the global north, the south to sort of make refugees. You know, a lot of them is imperialism, a lot of it is drug war, but there's also these, you know, the global move of capital, globalism, you know, and sort of the neoliberal version of it. But that also exists within the global north, right? We have this extraction of wealth from, say, post-industrial towns, the south, rural areas, and all we see is people sort of flooding into urban centers. In many ways, like the sort of the conversation surrounding gentrification is almost a parallel to the conversation surrounding sort of immigration to the global north. It's like, hey, a lot of people who are moving to New York City, they don't want to be here. Like, if you spend any time like on like Twitter listening to people complain about New York City who are from like middle of nowhere, like, you know, Ohio.
Oh, Ohio's the worst.
Ohio's great. I went to college in Ohio. Like, you know, I wouldn't go back, but it's fine. Like you understand that, you know, a lot of these things are like, it's not people like wanting to move to New York City. It's people being forced to by these material concerns.
So in a way, and I really like that actual line of thinking. So when you make it as basic as, you know, this has been hit too many times, and it's funny now because under Trump is the one who can brag about a great economy, even though we know that, like, you know, over 50% of Americans can't get $500 together, that people are driving, you know, a Lyft or an Uber as a second or third job to make ends meet if they're like school teachers. I mean, we know the realities of what those numbers conceal. But in 2015, 2016, it was MSNBC that like, oh, everything is excellent. The economy's moving. The Wall Street's humming. No words on inequality, no words on outsourcing, no words on overwork. I mean, the fusion of both underwork and actually people working way too much in a late stage capitalist context where, you know, with these feudal arrangements in the Silicon Valley economy. And so that when you come along with something like flat earth conspiracy or anything that even just appeals to the sentiment that is like, I'm going to just give you one piece of media content that says actually things are not that way, that resonates on a very basic level because it's like, yeah, it's not. I mean, I'm going to go Thomas Friedman for a second because this did actually, I mean, it didn't totally blow my mind, but it was so extreme. I had to take a cab the other day, and I was chatting with the guy or whatever, and he was telling me, he's from Haiti and he's doing this and that. And he's been in the United States for 10 years. And he asked me what I did. And I just said, oh, well, you know, I don't even know. I'm going to have to just start straight up lying because these conversations are like exhausting. So it's like, I talk about politics, whatever. And he was like, and this is, by the way, every time somebody votes for Trump, they always do this. He's like, I vote for Donald Trump. What do you think? Like, what do you think about that? Right. And of course, I'm just sitting in the back like, I don't really think much. I'm fucking exhausted and I don't care. But it was funny because, I mean, this is a Haitian man. He literally, he knew that Trump called his country a shithole. Like, he knew, and he was just like, he said, first he's like, he's a nationalist, and I like that, and I want nationalists to run. Like, if you're in Haiti, you should be a nationalist. If you're in the Philippines, you should be a nationalist. If you're American, you should be a nationalist. And then he said, which I think was the real, pull away, because obviously he's in the contingent of people who voted for Trump out of alienation. Of course, I think Republicans absolutely voted for him out of bigotry, but I think most of them. But I think a lot of the people did vote out of alienation. He just said, he just said, both parties, they're controlled by the elites. And that's what runs this place. And that's why this place doesn't work. And that's why nowhere works. And I just think, like, it was obviously really, it led to him voting for Trump. But there is, on the other hand, like, there is a way in which that's true, right? Like, it's like, yes, it is true. Corporations own the process, the 1%, whatever way you want to put it. and things are bad materially for most people as a result. That's undeniably true, and it's not what you're going to see on CNN or MSNBC.
I've watched documentaries, in air quotes, documentaries on Hulu about 9/11 being a conspiracy, various ones, because they used to be really popular on Hulu back, before it got all, got all fancy with The Handmaid's Tale. I missed those days. You could watch a documentary about basically any cryptid you could imagine doing 9/11. The Loch Ness Monster did 9/11. Bigfoot did 9/11. Mothman did 9/11. But at least half of those, it was funny. First, they would always weave in some sort of critique of the IMF or the World Bank, and I'm like, oh, wow. And I was like, you won't hear it. They were. At one point, I think the person was just like, did you know? Completely off topic. I don't know, somewhere in between, explaining again how Saddam Hussein was sent in time by 3 wizards to, for some reason, I can't, whatever. He's like,
because they were Baathists.
Yeah, basically. I think
the wizards were Baathists.
I think so. But anyway,
Arab Republican socialists.
Honestly, I'm not going to police what wizards are allowed to be, especially not, especially not in, the past, especially if they can control time. I'm not, listen, I welcome our new overlords. But, in between that, he made a point about all of, the majority of the capital in the world being controlled by more or less, 19 companies. And it's just that's kind of true. If you actually look at it, that's functionally true. And and also when you don't make those kind of narratives, when you don't make those narratives on mainstream, corporate channels, it makes everything sound like a conspiracy. Things that are not conspiracy theories sound like conspiracy theories. If we talk, I'll go to Venezuela. I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point. It's just thinking about Venezuela being a coup. Even saying that out loud sometimes. You're hey, Venezuela, they're trying to stage a coup in Venezuela. They the FBI or CIA is trying, it has sock puppet accounts on Twitter that are that if you tweet, hey, maybe America should stop overthrowing countries in global south, it's 3 seconds later you have Jose Caracas 2727 and you're mentioned going ha 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 JA JA JA, this guy doesn't even speak Spanish, he's not even Venezuela. And you're oh, the CIA is doing sock puppets. Oh, that's just me being crazy. It's oh wait, no, they do that.
Or they do that, but also, and certainly, and also how many private, how many consulting firms and tech firms are hired by this company that's affiliated with whoever to spread. That's how the world works. Private, political consulting and persuasion firms are utilized by every corporation, government, opposition group that has the funds and the capital to do those things. That's part of how the world works. But I just want to say, this is though the other reason why you do need to have, some type of, non-elitist and publicly accessible, basically socialist, Marxist, whatever information in the bloodstream. Because on the other hand, right, and because we're talking about the funny part of it, right? But honestly, it does. There is a reason why so much stuff does devolve into as an example, anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah.
Does the World Bank and the IMF thing go to capitalism, or does it go to Jews? And that's actually a pretty important split for how we're going to handle the predicament we're in right now.
That even goes to what you were saying about about your Haitian cab driver, right? And I will say I know a lot of Haitian members of my family who are basically immigrants from Haiti. One of my my uncle-in-law is immigrant from Haiti, and I think he also voted for Trump. And the reason why is that they have a lot of Haitians have a particular dislike of Hillary Clinton.
I was surprised he didn't bring that up. But I know that development. I know that as well. Haitians hate Clintons because of what they've done to Haiti.
You're not to do that's a very personal sort of, and I guess that comes down to being able to sort of unpack the plurality of blackness in America. The black vote's going for the Clintons. No. Some particular populations really don't like them for really specific reasons. But
a lot of Caribbean immigrants, if the Republicans weren't so unbelievably racist, would be Republicans.
Oh no, but that goes
right. That's what. But I just want to say real quick, the Haitians that I know that didn't vote for Hillary because of that they just didn't vote. Right? They didn't vote for Trump either. This was a different stance. He didn't mention any of that Clinton Foundation.
I'm not going to go. I'm not going to justify anything. I'm just saying that there are complex reasons that can't necessarily be ignored. But I think what you're saying goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
They should be foregrounded.
Yeah, they should be foregrounded. They should be put up in front. They should be put. But anyway, No, so I'll say this, the nationalism aspect of it, right? It's like that goes back to neoconservatism and its values being hegemonic, and not, and being able to, and whether we talk about the IMF, like, hey, the critique there is like, is the IMF a problem? Is the World Bank a problem because of capitalism? Is it a problem because of like the capitalist imperative that the IMF has that have like sort of basically, infected the entire structure of our infrastructural program abroad and at home? Or are we going to filter that, what is more or less an issue with capitalism through this sort of lens of neoconservative anti-Semitism? There's this deep history of that. And I think that mostly when you're talking about any institution, any group, anything that's sort of becoming like a counter-establishment position, if you're not being very careful about how you address the hegemonic ideals that you've been sort of socialized into your entire life, you're going to find yourself filtering whatever you're talking about through that lens, right? It's very easy to have like imperialist view of socialism, or imperialist view of communism, or imperialist view of anything if you're not sort of actively engaging with the sort of values you've been instilled with, right? I think a lot of times we say, okay, we present a lot of things as being diametrically opposed or mutually exclusive that are not. And instead of going, hey, you know what? As an American, there are just certain aspects of American imperialism, of American exceptionalism that I just inherently believe, because I've been told about them since I was, like a little kid. I see them on TV, I see them in the news, and, like maybe I don't believe in the excesses of them, right? So I think that we have what we term neoconservatives, like your John Boltons, your David Frums, who are like the most virulent examples of what we're talking about. People who are they've never seen a war that they don't like.
Right.
They're
warmongers. Militarists to the extreme.
They watch Trump try to bomb Syria and they get a stiffy. But then you have like neoconservatism, right? Small n, which is hegemonic, which has people believe to various degrees, unless they have a very specific, or very, vocal, active, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-xenophobic stance. The same is true about neoliberalism, right? A lot of the values of neoliberalism, individualism, austerity, the private market being the greatest good, et cetera, like people may not be a neoliberal, right? And I think this is where it becomes very, we have to be careful, what we accuse people of, not necessarily, Nazis, because who fucking cares about Nazis? But like, we have to be careful of accusing people of certain things as a way to say that this lives in a population, that this lives in a very specific subpopulation, right, and like everyone else who's not part of this population doesn't believe it, right? So we have racists, right? We have bigots, people who are actively out there, like your Sargon of Akkad being, Antifa'd by Big Bird in the UK. And then you have like racism, which is a structural thing, a systemic thing that people believe because we've been, more or less socialized to believe it. Same with misogyny, same with sexism, same with homophobia, same with all these, these things. And I think as part of the neoliberal agenda, that more or less occurs, reached its apex in the 90s under Blair and under, post-Thatcher and under Clinton, we had this sort of transformation of these structural systemic issues, right? Whether it be classism or elitism or racism or poverty, into like just more or less moral and intellectual failures that you could more or less pin on very specific populations as either being essential to who they are. So like, hey, racism is a thing that happens in the South. Or, that you can be inoculated against based on your group identity. Like, hey, you can't be racist if you're a Democrat. No matter what you do, that accusation is going to slide off of you. And more than anything else, it becomes an insult. People can't engage with their own sort of, bad ideas without it becoming a sort of an attack on their ego. Where they, okay, well, hey, everyone fucks up. It's like everyone, but go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
So everyone fucks up. Everyone has moments where like the things they've been taught to believe from a childhood like slip out. Like, oh fuck.
Well, I think that's one of the dynamics we're going to have to play with, right? Because I think it's like, on one hand, I mean, and this is another reason, that's why I also, I'm always banging on about how toxic I think so much of like the sort of like cancel sort of culture and things like that is, because I think also the corollary of it is usually true, which is that this stuff is working and operating and manifesting a lot, and but you also need to like create an open enough space so that people actually can deal with it and engage with it with some like kind of actual ability other than just sort of like posturing and freaking out and presenting basically and doing performative wokeness.
I agree. And I'm not just sort of, I agree with some caveats, right? So I don't want to be too hard on cancel culture, even though I will one day be canceled. Because like, it's an inevitability, because just as a person, like I'm just like a dumb bro. It's gonna happen one day if I can't hit that delete tweet button too fast enough. But like I'm careful about critiquing cancel culture, just like I'm careful about critiquing sort of like wokeness, just because I think that they be like, in many ways, you run the risk of doing what happened with the SJW, the critique, which is like you run the risk of, and this is my just personal opinion, I think that, you know, despite the serious issue of a lack of ethics in games journalism, which I feel as though, you know, we haven't gotten to yet.
No, and we never will.
But the
show is never gonna get to that.
But they gave.
We got to that with the struggle session, guys.
Oh, that's true.
We've actually talked about that before.
That is true. Wow.
They reduced the women's bra cup size in Mortal Kombat to anywhere between a B and a double A. Yeah. And I know because I sat at my computer with my calipers and my my ruler to get the bandwidth. But no. It's easy to sort of devolve into what the SJW critique became, which was this inflation of a series of anomalous people, more or less, who had no political power, who had no sort of central hierarchy, that was more just like, and like to create this kind of straw man meme that you could prop up to more or less be a cipher for the increased inclusivity of marginalized populations in their concerns into spaces that were traditionally more or less like, you know, all white or all male or all rich people, right? Like look at people, the SJWs on college campus are ruining college, right? You know, that you have people like, I bring up Sargon of Akkad too, because he's funny and he's also like incredibly dumb.
My old debate partner.
You're old. You know, you met him in the marketplace of ideas, and he forgot his wallet. But
he did not.
But you run the, like, you know, like you run the risk of doing what he did, which when he was at his highest popularity in 2014, which was basically just pull up the course listings for like you know, liberal arts colleges in the middle of Maine and go, can you play feminist critical theory?
Well, excuse me. First of all, there's no need to attack liberal arts colleges in the middle of Maine. And secondly,
really?
Yeah, excuse you. And then secondly, no, I mean, look, of course, I mean, that's the whole way you have to pull off the critique, right? Like, it goes without saying that there's there is an anti-SJW cottage industry of reactionary idiots who are using and also it's a combination, right? Like sometimes they're responding to either anomalous excesses or they're responding to things that I actually I just genuinely think is like a bad call or a bad idea. And then they're also responding to what you just said, which is like, they don't actually want to achieve those goals. So there's a fundamental structural difference there. They don't want those spaces to be changed. They don't want, you know, greater justice and access and representation or whatever. So there's like just a fundamental dividing line disagreement. I do think still though, like, and part of it is just practical. If you know, engage in culture in a certain way or in political warfare in a certain way that opens up a whole terrain of like just places that other people can just like clown on and don't look good to basically like swing voters, as it were. I don't think that's a good call.
Well, so that was never really my problem with woke culture. My problem with woke culture, and I can see your point. My problem with woke culture was more of it became this sort of social justice-y framework, again, I think filtered through neoliberalism.
Well, that's the deeper critique.
Yeah.
Please me.
And so it's just like, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? You know, if you don't actively engage with the values of neoliberalism, you don't actively engage with this sort of like this new economy of morality that was, you know, of morality entirely divorced from sort of material conditions and, you know, the actual betterment of people on a systemic and structural level, but just focus on this sort of morality and this economy of language, symbolic. Have you mastered the symbolic language of this? Have you mastered sort of, whether it be academic language or whatever the language, you know, the lexicon, the specialized lexicon of your space is, in order to basically present, you know, yourself as being without sin. Like I've very rarely seen like, and this, I guess I don't want to, you know, I'm sure this exists out there because everything's just online, but you know, whenever people describe woke culture or you see a tweet that is very, very, you know, quote unquote woke, it doesn't seem to engage with sort of this idea of these are systemic problems that we all are sort of grappling with as a society, but instead, like, this is a problem that, you know, is more or less I can foist on another population. I can say, hey, you know, like it's a...
Or there's a list of catechisms and rules and etiquette that I can follow, and therefore I'm good. Whereas, like, the reality being is that everybody's implicated by, you know, that it's ideological indoctrination is way more complicated than that. And that, yes, these things operate an institutional level. Yeah. Right. Like that and, you know, and I think that, you know, it's taken to like the comic extreme in, you know, Bernie does an interview with the New York Times with like a journalist who, in fact, objectively is being quite rude to him, but who cares? It's great. Journalists should be rude to politicians, but is substantively saying like, yeah. I don't care about, I didn't even look up the Wikipedia entry on the Contras mass murdering villages with weapons and money from Reagan, and you opposing that. I'm just focusing on, you know, somebody said death to Yankees, what did you do? And then the fourth time that he gets asked the same question, he goes, I'm not sure you understand what I'm saying, or something like that. And then Jill Flipovich rushes Twitter to go, well, that's, I mean, just look at how rude was that? Well, I mean, you know, just the complete like it's another way of foregrounding manners over substance at times.
I mean, I have verbal tics. I mean, foregrounding is one of them. I'll say ostensibly a lot.
I love foregrounding. We have to do a new segment. Unless you have wrap it up for us, but we have to get to a new segment.
No, definitely. I'll just say this. No, I agree with you. And I think that, you know, we're talking about is, you know, in the 90s, going back to what I was saying about the Clintons and the Blairs and the post sort of Reagan, post Thatcher world, it's like we saw a shift in the Democratic Party and other sort of, you know, traditionally mainstream left parties around Europe and around the world. A shift from engaging in their traditional mechanisms and the traditional sort of arguments for why they're better than the far right, right? Which is what I think we're seeing a shift back towards with the candidacy of Bernie Sanders and the candidacy of Elizabeth Warren. Like, traditionally it was, hey, we're better than the far right because we have public policies aimed at solving widespread systemic issues. The New Deal, the better, you know, the Fair Deal, you know, large-scale infrastructure projects, et cetera, towards a new sort of argument surrounding this moral economy of symbolic anti-racism, symbolic feminism, and like who can master the best languages, you know, who's read the most, you know, Bell Hooks books, you know, who can memorize the most Langston Hughes poems, who can sort of navigate this sort of language the best without tripping up, you know, without making any sort of failures, even if it's not reflected in any kind of material betterment of the people you're talking about, right? And so I think that has become mirrored, and it's become a very good way to negotiate power within, you know, centrist spaces, right? It's very easy to sort of go, hey, you know what, I'm going to write 1,500 words criticizing, you know, Bernie Sanders for not necessarily knowing the exact proper definition of intersectionality, because like why, you know, but here's the thing, no one does really. No one uses it properly. Right. Like no one uses it properly. And like, you know, and it, you know, it makes it like when you make the language the goal of social justice versus a tool to achieve it, all you end up is where we're at right now, which is like people sort of becoming more and more alienated by the process because they don't know the language either. Right. But you're telling them that it's important. Like it's a great way to make yourself like the, you know, the leading voice of color at Vox or Vice. But like when it comes down to actually say, hey, you know, helping in the prison industrial complex, it's like it's no mass movement.
I think we tend to agree. So
we're smart people.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I only bring on the best brains on TMBS. Really quickly, though, I do want to say we got to get to this segment in a second, then we'll go to the post game. But I do think it's important. I mean, can you give me, if you don't mind, give me a couple of minutes and maybe fit it in though to like, because we titled tonight's show "The False Promise of Wonkery," and I think that look, if Wonkery means Elizabeth Warren instead of Tim Geithner, then we have a vast, infinite improvement in our politics and our society. But I still think Sanders and Warren are still representing, at least for me, this split. You know, this split that amongst a certain, and again, it's an upgrade. I'm glad at least that this mindset of sort of technocracy is at least going in a good, progressive direction, like Warren represents. So again, I'll keep emphasizing that's an infinite improvement in my estimation. But it kind of reminds me, my God, I hesitate to use this analogy because I dread the phone calls. But we get a lot of calls, and I have even actually a really good friend of mine who has, he wants to talk about nuclear power with regards to dealing with the climate crisis. And I don't even want to get into all of the details of it right now, but the point being is like, climate is not a technological problem. It's a political and economic one. And of course, technology is part of it, but it's a second order thing. With regards to dealing, like people, it's great. Elizabeth Warren is generating some really great policies. I think we talked about one earlier that I actually don't think is a good policy with regards to this green military stuff. I have real problems with it. But there's a lot of areas on domestic issues that she's foregrounding really good policy ideas, really good things. And what is going to happen is that just as with, the Affordable Care Act, for God's sake, which was designed not even as like a good Warren style policy, but as a, grand synthesis that wouldn't offend these incumbent interests. There was an endless amount of money spent to destroy it and propagandize against it and racialize Obama, just as they will obviously attack Warren on her gender and so on. And the point being is when Sanders gets up there and basically says, look, they took all of your shit. I'm going to get some of it back. And the way we get some of it back is going to involve not only me getting elected president, but basically, and he doesn't say this explicitly because he can't, but if you read between the lines, he's not that far off from saying, like, you need to be making calls, pounding the pavements, be on the streets, making life, just giving them hell in order to do this, because this is a political question. If it was just a question of, oh, we all of a sudden realized the last couple of decades were absolutely horrible for most people across the board. So what we're going to do is we're going to rein in the banks and we're going to give, we're going to end the insurance industry, and we'll just do that because it's the most rational, ethical thing to do. Great. But that's not how power works. And it just still strikes me that it's starting to really crystallize to me in the Sanders versus Warren case. And even when people go, my God, like, oh, Warren's to the left of Sanders. Of course, you have to totally exclude foreign policy and the military, but you have to just solely be looking at politics as like an algorithmic problem and not a political one. Anyways, that's my spiel. What do you think?
So I'll say this, right? I think that I'm going to lump Sanders and Warren into one bucket for a moment, and then I'm going to sort of make distinctions between them. I'll say this. I think for the past 30, 40, maybe 50 years, going back to Carter, the main project of the neoliberalism and of the Democratic Party specifically has been to separate politics from power, right? Separate how we talk about problems, politics broadly speaking, how we talk about how we, organize resources and how we solve social material problems from like the actual power to solve those problems, right? And they've created, and like I said, talking back to the new moral economy of language they created, they wanted to emphasize the first part, like how we talk about problems is what makes us viable, not how we, not us doing anything about those problems. So what I like about both Warren and Sanders is that both of them are sort of going back to like, hey, you know what, we are going to make power and politics more or less inextricable from one another. Like I have all these policies that I'm going to go out here, and then they're widespread public policies that are aimed specifically at solving large systemic issues. Now, where I think the difference between Warren and Sanders is even when you have like certain policies of theirs that are, maybe a hair's breadth apart, that hair's breadth is the result of an ideological difference, right? I think, by their own admission, Warren believes in capitalism. She believes that all the problems that we are facing currently right now are excesses of capitalism. They're excesses of the system, not functions, right? And I believe, more or less based, if you believe Bernie, you believe his surrogates, and you believe, sort of the rhetoric coming out of his camp that he hasn't necessarily tamped down, that he necessarily believes that the capitalism is this is the function. Like this is where we are now.
It's a feature, not a bug.
It's a feature, not a bug, right? And so what I will say, though, about Elizabeth Warren is that she, from a policy standpoint, Wonkery, more or less, she is the best the Democratic Party can do. She is the... And
you're excluding Sanders when
Yeah,
you say
I'm
that.
excluding Sanders.
Gotcha.
She is the best at liberalism, centrist liberalism
Absolutely.
has. Like, from a policy standpoint, I view her more or less as maybe maybe this is sort of an asinine comparison, but she's like the other side of the coin to Obama, right? She's like the opposite Obama. Like she is a candidate who is running almost 100% on policy after policy after policy, and they are all founded in this idea that the institutions themselves can be repaired to the point in which they curb in the worst excesses of capitalism. And in doing that, she actually provides us a service and saying, okay, here, like you're actually putting out policies, and they are all sort of within this paradigm of the system is not the problem, it's the bad actors within the system, and we can critique that. When you say green imperialism, or even her policy to sort of tamp down on the maternal death gap between black mothers and white mothers, that exists in many, many places around America, specifically, obviously, I'm talking about. We can look at the very specifics of her policy and say, this is like the problem with your policy. The problem is like with these mechanisms is that they are based in the idea that capitalism can be fixed, right? And that's what makes it a problem. If the Democratic Party was serious, if they were serious about sort of like, let's be honest, about tamping down on the Sanders revolution, the Sanders math, the math political movement, they would be putting all of their power, all of their might behind Elizabeth Warren. They would be saying, you know what, in a head-to-head battle, maybe Elizabeth Warren can be the person who unites the farthest elements to the left of the party with the sort of the centrist elements on the right. We might lose a few Wall Street bankers. We might only pull in sort of like $3 billion for the next presidential campaign versus $4 billion, but at least that would make the viability of our party as like, hey, we are a party that is actually serious about solving your problems, not just talking about your problems.
No, I think you're 100. I think you're 100% right though. That people that they really reveal themselves when they don't. Yes. But
just to, I guess just to close out that, it's just like I think that Elizabeth Warren campaign, there's going to be a lot of, she's not doing as well as she should be doing. I think we can both agree on that. At least within the cabal of assholes who are running. Like she's not doing better than Beto, or she might be doing better than Beto now because
I think she's doing better than Beto. I mean, to me, again, I'm already, for me, bluntly, I'm just already at the point of like. And I've thought this for a while. I always thought if Biden got in, I thought it was going to be Sanders versus Biden. And I think, frankly, whether it's him or somebody else, it's going to be Sanders versus. So at a certain point, I want the progressive forces to coalesce around Bernie Sanders.
I agree too. But I will say this, right? There are going to be a lot of hot takes, a lot of articles.
But of course she should. I mean, yes, of course.
She should not only be doing better.
Beto or Buttigieg or all these other idiots.
She should be smoking them. And, and there's going to be a lot of articles explaining why she's not smoking them. And they're going to all have various sort of rationales. And they're all going to be more or less legitimate, right? I think her gender plays a role. I think, I think for sort of the centrist critique that was her gender is going to play a role, obviously. Maybe people are going to bring up this sort of like her weird rollout with the random like fact sheet website that was kind of weird. Right. Maybe people will even go into like the fact that she didn't run in 2016, so people feel like weird about that. More or less ranging on the area of legitimacy. Where I think that people are not going to be really engaging with is that the Democratic Party and their sort of most ignited base, that sort of liberal centrist, not like sort of the far left base, like it's coalescing around Sanders, but like the centrist base who's coalescing around Biden and Biden and Kamala or Kamala, Buttigieg, who have a random flavor of the month every week. It's like they have been conditioned by the last 30 years to not view policy, like the kind of campaign Elizabeth Warren is running, a policy-heavy campaign, as like a legitimate type of campaign. They are just used to a more sort of ethereal series of symbolic gestures, right? Like they are used to, insofar that she is a wonk, she is a real wonk. Like Elizabeth Warren, for all she's not a fake Paul Ryan wonk.
First of all, she's 100% a real wonk, but I think that wonkery is its own symbolic language in today's politics. And I think that, again, there is a tendency, and of course, I mean, the really extraordinary thing is the fact that people call Buttigieg a wonk when he doesn't talk about policy at all, and they substitute the trivial qualities they're obsessed with in him, like the fact that he speaks 5 languages, over what Warren is actually doing. Warren is actually doing wonkery. But again, what concerns me is I don't think wonkery is a substitute for really understanding how power works and saying, and I think where Bernie is actually some type of socialist, is I think he actually understands that literally the only way to even get the type of agenda that Warren is talking about to even be remotely possible is to have such a relentless countervailing force to oligarchy in this country that's those crowds he generates. I mean, that's filling a stadium in Augusta or wherever. That's, before the campaign's barely even begun, filling a stadium in LA. I mean, and I think that there's a contingent of people, though, particularly in like the wonk class, who are fixating on this like policy for policy's sake question. And that's great. That's better than language symbolism. But those policies are still not going to mean a damn thing either if you don't actually have a real strategy for reorienting how power works. Sanders does that.
So here's where I agree with you, right? And so I think I want to, bring up what Nate Silver said, right? That he said that, policy is not something that interests, more he meant poor people. He was like,
right.
He said policy appeals to like the elites and the journalists. Basically, right. It's like policy doesn't. Poor people don't care about policy. People of color don't care about policy. It's like only the big brained media people and political class care about policy, right? And so here's where I would make that distinction. It's like people who don't exist within that sort of want class world of like lanyard boys and DC elite thinkers. It's like they don't care about policy, big P, as like you said, as a symbol, of means testing and all these sort of like the complexity of policy as a stand-in for moral righteousness or intellectualism, right? Which can also be indexed by just being someone like Pete Buttigieg, which like I speak 5 languages and I look like the mayor of Whoville.
It doesn't even matter that he doesn't do policy. It's like, well, obviously
he looks smart.
Harvard, he looks smart. He speaks in a nerdy way, so of course he's smart.
And of course, when you sort of have that that sort of really shallow understanding of smartness, you're going to by necessity like loop in random like misogynistic and racist things. Like of course he looks smart. He looks like he's a politician, right? Like, he looks like one. He looks like the mayor of Whoville, like I said before, but like he looks like Alfred E. Newman. He looks like a character on that old.
I think Trump already took care of that one.
He looks like a character on that old Adult Swim show, Moral Oral. But
it looks like the old Adult Swim show, Moral Oral.
But I think that I hate to say poor people, but people who lack the ability to vote entirely on symbolic gestures. And then he made funny enough, he made the point like, oh, people like that are voting all on identity. Like that's a big issue for them. Like it's not really. It's like if that were the case, Kamala Harris would be doing better than Joe Biden in the black community. She's not.
I think you're totally. I think substance of. Are you going to come and actually do something about the crisis we're in? Yes.
They care about policy.
But that's not symbolic representation. That's real.
They care about policy as like a way to solve problems.
Right.
And I think that's where we've lost it. Going back to power separated from politics. Like they people who have real problems, not to be crass, like they care about how your policies are going to affect those problems. They don't care about like the sort of the complex math behind them.
Right.
And it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they don't have the time.
They don't have time.
They're not, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Some people don't have time to break down batting average
stats because they're not being paid to.
Yeah, that's not being paid to do that. Exactly.
It's like, but yeah. So I will say I think that there is this absolutely right. There's this symbolic value to the big P policies that Elizabeth Warren is putting out there, and you can sort of see it not only in elements of the center, but elements of the left who are sort of more or less like her, where it's like you like the idea that she has a plan for everything, but you're not reading the plans. It's like you're not actually you like the the existence of a plan, and I do too because it allows me to sort of critique them, and by nature critique liberalism at its most crystallized form, like written in paper. Here's what liberalism has to say about black mothers dying. Here's what it has to say about the climate. Here's why it's a problem, and here's what we need to do. Move towards socialism or communism or anarcho-primitivism or whatever.
Right.
And see that's helpful to us on the left, versus like a Biden or Buttigieg who's like, I'm going to do something about racism or I'm going to do something about the climate. It's like you just got to believe me. You got to believe me, and I'll put it out. I don't want to bog you down with the minutia, right?
Yeah, I don't want you. So all right, really quick. Let's get. We'll take a few more minutes here, and then we'll get to the post game. But just to underline this is the Pod Save guys with Stephen Colbert distilling pretty much I think everything you're saying, Brandon. Oops. They don't use our music. They're not cool.
It's Dan, Joe, and Dan, or
I don't know.
Like right now, Democrats are taking little white cups and going up to various frozen yogurt things and trying them, and they're tasting. They're like, gay mayor. Interesting. They're trying different flavors.
I've had that flavor.
And the thing about it is, they stuffed their faces with Texas congressmen like 4 months ago.
Right.
And now they can't really tell. Is like, do I love it or am I sick of it? And they don't know. And then there's a big tub of Biden vanilla somewhere, and they're like, we'll just grab that thing and go home. So who knows? Who knows how it shakes out?
Yeah.
These are people who do not have real problems in their lives. that need any attending to. Yes.
So what makes the Pod Save America? I've only ever listened to about 20 minutes total of the Pod Save America podcast because it's by far the worst podcast I've ever heard in my entire life. And I've listened to a podcast called Barefoot is Legal, And all they do is talk about barefoot.
legal.
Yeah, because barefoot is legal. You know, you're allowed to be barefoot.
Yeah,
You're
allowed. There's a lot of people have a lot of questions and doubts about it, but it's really important to.
It's important to foreground that barefoot is legal, and that no shirt, no shoes, no service is not an actual FDA guideline or a Department of Health guideline. It's a private thing, and you can talk. But
so what is it about?
Big shoe.
Big shoe.
It's big
shoe. What was the question about PodSave?
They are by far worse than that podcast, and all Barefoot is Legal does is talk about barefoot being legal. What makes it
sounds kind of cool actually. Yeah.
I know it sounds like it could be funny. Ironically, it is not.
Okay,
it's incredibly tedious.
I believe you.
But anyway, they do have live callers though, and they are amazing. Not worth sitting through.
I think we're gonna need to listen to this sometime.
Anyway, but like
let's have a listing party.
What makes the Pod Save America boys interesting is that they have operated at the highest level of politics, arguably. They were an Obama administration.
But worked for President Obama.
Yeah. But they more or less have like a high schooler's understanding of the world. And it's like they're almost like the negative Joe Rogan show, where you listen to them speak, and you're like, how did you navigate these such high level spaces when you don't know anything about politics, you don't know anything about the world. Your ads are terrible. I don't know how anyone sits through. God, their ads are so bad.
Well, I think it's the same. I mean, look, I think I think it's all of the symbolic tendencies we've just talked about, though.
But here's the thing: I don't think they're wrong. Where I think their analysis, I don't think they're wrong about about sort of like that high level Democrat voter that
definitely.
I don't think they're wrong. But what I do think their analysis is lacking is that was a strategy. It's like that value system that the Democratic Party has that revolves around the random sort of like, not the Democratic Party, but like the highest levels, their most valued voter, their voter who writes op-eds, their voter who like goes on MSNBC to sort of advocate for them. Like that valuation system was a strategy. It was a strategy to disguise from the fact that they no longer had any real policies to offer you.
Right.
And so like, when you talk about why Elizabeth Warren isn't doing so well, you have to fold in the fact that like she was sort of like, she was starting from a negative position because they set up a valuation system that she's just not prepared to compete in. It's like, in a real party, I hate to say it, but the Democratic Party is not necessarily a real political party anymore. It's like at best, I mean, they're trying to be one, I guess, again, but at best they're like a consultancy scam.
Yeah, I do think, look, I mean, globally the same pattern was set going back to the 80s and the 90s, right? And you had basically, and I think it's that book by Stephanie Mudge, right? Essentially, and she charts it like, are parties funded by and relying on the services of corporations or unions? And then what's the difference between campaigns that harness the grassroots versus harness, basically political consultants that are paid through by raising a lot of corporate cash? And that, that's reflected. I mean, that was the whole, and the third way was a global, it wasn't just Clinton and Blair, it was Schroeder, it was presidents in Africa and Latin America and across the Eurozone the last time that socialist parties were in power. But I do think, and I guess this is maybe where I have more wariness about Warren, is because to me though, there's always been, Bill Clinton was actually known for, and a lot of his, I mean, people know the sort of like top line, like Bill Clinton scandals, he's Bubba, whatever. He was known for being an intellectual and a wonk, and his policies were certainly, again, the policy argument is clear, and Elizabeth Warren's a massive upgrade. But the figure inside a certain part of the Democratic Party, whether you're talking about Michael Dukakis or Bill Clinton or Al Gore, and these are all very different figures in terms of their charisma, in terms of their politics, in terms of their geography, but they all were glorified in the press for being brainy. That was part of their narrative. And again, I think speaking in that very isolated group, there is that like innate belief in, if you have policy, you are automatically doing something. And I think, to me, like the real starting point is, first of all, you're running for president. So yes, like unless you're friggin' Beto or Buttigieg or whatever, you have policy. That shouldn't be something you get extra credit for. But the second part is, if you don't have a plan of how you have actual energy to implement your policy, then you have, to me, functionally nothing. I think that's even the other irony of Obama, is that Obama wasn't particularly policy heavy, but Obama actually did have the army of people that he just didn't utilize then, because at the end of the day, he was there to represent a change and literally represent a change. It wasn't like we're not going to do anything about Wall Street or any of these other structural factors. So I don't necessarily need a group of mobilized people that are going to be bothering the White House.
Well, no, I agree with you. And I think that's where Elizabeth Warren fails to me. And I think that's why but I also think that's the appeal that she has, besides the wonkery, for, your Ezra Kleins or your Nate Silver.
But those are the people that worship that shit.
They worship the wonkery, but I also think that, it's though, even the sort of, your Chris Hayeses, right? Like, they don't view themselves as the way we view them. They don't view themselves as like centrist, liberal, like part of the problem people, right? They view themselves as the responsible left. Right, they're the David Graeber sort of, like, they were like far left in college. Shit, Van Jones was like a Maoist.
Van Jones was a Maoist.
The Maoist,
yes.
And like they view themselves as having grown up and like they now understand what's possible. What's really, quote unquote, really popular. They're the adult leftists in the room. And so they look at Elizabeth Warren candidacy and they see somebody who, again, is going to rein in the worst excesses of capitalism. They're probably, critical of the banks just like we are. Maybe not as far critical, but I
think the only person you're describing of those three is Chris Hayes. I think Ezra Klein, maybe-ish, although never forget the PR job he did for Paul Ryan. And Nate Silver is just an idiot. Nate Silver shouldn't even be talking about politics.
I'm a generous guy.
You are super generous.
I'm very generous.
Fuck Nate Silver.
But,
hashtag unfollow Nate Silver.
Incredibly basic.
And remember what Ezra Klein wrote about Paul Ryan.
And so,
that's important history.
But I think why they like her better than like Sanders, even if they're
because they don't like movements,
they don't like challenge, they don't like movements,
they don't like who wasn't a careerist,
they don't like that too. And I would say like Sanders has many problems, but where I think he and Obama have some sort of alignment is that they both have these mass movements under them that are way further to the left than they are.
And does Sanders have like actual problems, or how much of that is just kind of manufactured bullshit?
I mean, it depends on being comparatively, like problems compared to
compared to compared to Ho Chi Minh, he has problems.
But compared to Ho Chi Minh, we all have problems.
We all have problems. I'm saying Bernie Sanders always falls short against like the imaginary people that are in people's heads. Like, I guess if it's like, sure, T joked at our live show, if Malcolm X's body was reanimated, who he wants to run for president. I mean, yes, great. If that happened, I would really be curious to see what he had to say about, renegotiating NAFTA. I would take a hard look at that candidacy. But it's just starting, because it's like, look, yeah, but he's a good guy with an amazing record going back to the 60s, and he offers something unparalleled in modern politics. And now all of a sudden people are like, well, I don't know. I don't like a vote he cast. I'm not.
I'm not.
I know you're not.
I'm not there, but
so frustrated.
I don't want to stand. I don't want to stand any politician pretend that they're perfect, right? So
but
no one's perfect, right? Where I'm not interested. I'm not interested in hearing anybody to the right of Sanders talk about how he's a flawed candidate, because let's be perfectly honest. Like, compared to the kind of the cabal of dumbasses there and like they're standing, it's like he's basically Jesus Christ reincarnated.
He is a god. He's Joe Biden or Beto or any of these
just by being able to pull up a video of him from 5 weeks ago, forget 5 days, forget 5 years ago, or fucking 3 decades ago, of him just of not being like, hey, you know what? I think the crime bill wasn't so bad. It's like he already is better than their best candidate, right? So I mean, I think, but insofar that he could be better on certain issues, of course. But here's the thing: I think that I would not vote for him specifically with the idea that I'm going to vote him into office and we're going to change him once he's in. That's fucking stupid. We don't have
electing him or Corbyn or any of them. Is that the first step?
It's just the first step, right? I think this is what makes me think that. This is what makes me more of a fan of him. But he has the mass movement behind him, and I don't think he's going to Obama the mass movement. I don't think he's going to Obama for America the mass movement and sort of fold them into that party apparatus. I think that's exactly why they don't like him and they like Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren doesn't have that mass movement behind him, and I think we can both agree that whether you're talking about Obama for America's mass movement that was ready to more or less take over America.
Yes.
In 2008, in 2007, 2008, once Obama was in office, the OFA was so energized. They were ready to take over America. Had they not been sort of basically stamped out,
he mothballed them.
They wouldn't have lost 1,000+ seats. I don't think Bernie Sanders is going to do that to the Bernie Revolution. I think whether or not he falls, gets pulled to the right pulled to the left is irrelevant. I think he will allow that movement to flourish. And I think that's the problem that they have with him, because I think more than anything, in critiquing the system, the critique that people who are pro-Bernie, that mass movement, are critiquing is the same system that the Nate Silvers and Ezra Kleins and Chris Hayeses and, you know, any number of like professional media leftists or like professional media liberals belong to, and they don't like to see themselves implicated in the exact same system that like we're talking about, right? I think when you talk about the centrist class, you're talking about a class of people who believe that their comfort is intrinsic to social order. And I think that when you had Trump elected, there were two options. There was you recognize that the system that left, let's say, the top 10% of America so comfortable, not obscenely wealthy like your sort of, you know, your Bernie Madoffs or whatever, but like wealthy enough that they weren't worried about whether or not their next paycheck was going to leave them destitute, right? Like, you know, when you look at those people and you say, hey, you know what, the system that left you so comfortable, that left you with a column in the New York Times, that left you with, you know, a decent apartment in New York City, it's like that's the same system that requires that people, you know, basically die from being unable to afford insulin. They don't like being implicated within that system, even if it's just tacitly. It's like, hey, you know what, you didn't choose to be a system, but you're benefiting from it, and we're going to reorganize it. And I think that particular aspect of the Bernie movement, that, hey, we're not just talking about the bankers. We're talking about, you know, we're talking about MSNBC. We're talking about New York Times. Absolutely. We're talking about the tech startups. We're talking about we're talking about Facebook.
And I think that's another, and again, we got to go to this final segment. No, it's perfect. Please, you kidding me? This is my fault, and this is great. But I think that the final, what happened? You all right?
The barefoot is legal.
Oh, you didn't see that? You didn't see that we have barefoot is legal is up? No, but I just want to say, I think that's another big contradiction in the Warren campaign, because I think that, like, if even just that reform agenda, if that actually went up against that mentality can superficially be drawn to it because it likes the Wonkery, but it won't actually like the implications. Let's get to this last segment. Do you want to play this for a second? This is Barefoot is Legal. Is this the guy that you watch?
Proof is here. Just want to talk about our upcoming event, the BIL Dollar Bomb, where we're asking for our members, group members, business page people, and everyone else, if you support us and the lifestyle.
All right. You're right. It's not irony funny.
I'll just finish on this. Yes. I think that I know I'm going long, but I'll just finish on this. I think when people talk about this sort of the false equation between populism on the left and populism on the right, it's easy when to think that like the center who's doing this is being entirely stupid and disingenuous. But I think it's more or less they're being myopic. Yeah. I think that they see the threat that comes, the economic and material threat to their sort of like material comfort that comes from the mass reorganization of wealth as a existential threat to the society. Just like I think they see the far, I don't think that is true. I think that they see the threat to their sort of psychological and emotional well-being that comes from like the rampant neo-fascism of the far right, the vocal, explicit far, you know, that makes them feel bad about their country, bad about that system. Like they see both as equally threatening to their position, not equally threatening to an objective good of the world, but how they feel about that.
I agree with
you. And I think that's what makes them so unreliable for mass movements, either building them or supporting them, because whether they participate is entirely based in how they feel about the status quo, not what it actually is.
Either way, brunch is interrupted. All right, we have a new. Of course you do. We all like brunch. Just the standard. We have a new segment we're doing, called Daily Show Gone Bad. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, the Daily Show was always bad, and Jon Stewart, blah, blah, blah. But just go with us. Maybe we'll come up with a better name for it at some point.
So there's been a definite...
yeah, I also am a strong holder of the position that you also look at things in their context. And, you know, the flaws of Jon Stewart in 2004, 2003 are a lot different than John Oliver comparing AMLO to Trump in 2018. That's my opinion.
I don't like Trevor Noah.
I don't like any of them. I don't like Trevor Noah. I don't like John Oliver. And I really don't like this guy.
It says something when Seth Meyers is definitely the best.
Seth Meyers, head and shoulders. But we're going to just play this clip and then we'll open it up. But this is important because, you know, obviously we cover Brazil a lot on this show, partially because Lula da Silva is the most prominent political prisoner in the world, partially because the United States undermined democracy in Brazil and helped this sort of political warfare against the Workers' Party with a big geostrategic focus, which is, I would say, access to vital natural resources in Brazil and wanting the largest country in Latin America to go in a certain direction. And Hassan Minhaj did a segment and I should give him credit. And maybe I shouldn't say that. I mean, look, I don't hate this guy. I don't think it's not my, humor-wise, I don't think he's funny. It's not my style. My first impression of him when I first heard of him was I thought it was great that a Muslim guy was getting a position on The Daily Show, and that it was cool, and that was really all I knew about him. This particular style of humor is just, I don't get it. I don't think it's funny. But he's doing a segment on Bolsonaro's threat to the Amazon, which is great. Good for him. But this is why the fact that The Guardian and the New York Times and every single major outlet repeats uncritically what has happened in Brazil. So as an example, they don't have to say what the real position is, which is that Lula is in jail on politically trumped up charges, and the judiciary is totally compromised. They could say the journalistically responsible position would be it's disputed, questionable circumstances. Here's a quote from somebody representing, here's one of Lula's attorneys, whatever. What Hassan Minhaj does here, and this is actually a great example, this in some ways to me does tie into what I really do hate about pop performative woke culture, because he's going to uncritically replicate U.S. propaganda about Brazil, but he's been trained enough in appearing to be conscious that, and conscious, like, God forbid you actually study what's happening in Brazil and you have an understanding of the political process there. You just have to affirm that you're not like a stupid American. Check out this clip.
Laws to protect the environment, those laws aren't always enforced because of insane amounts of political and corporate greed. And I know, as an American, we should probably shut the fuck up when it comes to the moral high ground. Americans lecturing Brazil about corruption is like Steve Bannon launching a skincare line. It's just like, take care of your own shit before you dive into the whole face thing. But corruption in Brazil is truly on a whole nother level.
Sorry,
Brazil's last three presidents were...
He's insulated himself. I'm sorry, you're doing something. I shouldn't have done that, but he's done the woke joke and he showed that he gets it. He's not saying corruption's just in Brazil. So now it's cool to uncritically repeat mass propaganda coming out of Brazil.
He's one of the good Americans.
He's one of the good Americans. Go ahead.
A whole nother level. Brazil's last three presidents were steeped in scandals. Dilma Rousseff impeached for financial misconduct. Michel Temer charged with corruption. And Lula da Silva currently in jail for stealing DVDs from a red box. I'm just kidding. Corruption.
Okay, so as you know, if you watch the show, Dilma impeached in an insanely, a universally condemned process at this point for literally an accounting trick, a basic accounting trick used by every politician in Brazil and people in the United States. If Barack Obama was impeached because the CBO said that one of his budget projections was misleading, that would be relatively analogous to what Dilma was removed for in a political process. Michel Temer does have serious corruption charges around him, and he was the person who portrayed Dilma as her VP. And that actually is a relevant distinction. Lula, there's zero material evidence, and he led in the polls, and we already know the story. And again, this guy does not even have the staff to do a process that multiple members of Congress, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Charlie Crist, have signed letters attesting to, at the very least, the questionable circumstances of the imprisonment of Lula. There is an abundance of information. You can read interviews with Lula's attorneys. You could do a basic Google search. But these people do not have the ability to, at the very least, do follow-up research on a process that also the UN has condemned on an incredibly prominent leader. Like, the arrogance and laziness is stunning. And I do just want to play this clip because they also could have seen this. They could have watched Noam Chomsky, who maybe Noam Chomsky isn't, hip to them. Noam Chomsky doesn't have like the hot takes on Twitter and doesn't have the great like Steve Bannon skincare material, but he is, I would say he's a relatively respected public intellectual. Here he is on Primo Nutmeg, which is an independent YouTube site, I guess, explaining what really happened in Brazil.
There's a much more serious one in Brazil. Brazil, a really horrendous figure, the worst of all the authoritarian figures now and plaguing the world, did succeed in getting elected. By one of the means was imprisoning the likely victor, Lula da Silva, who was far ahead in the polls, imprisoning him for 25 years, essentially a death sentence, solitary confinement, not allowed to get print material, not allowed to make public statements, to try to silence him before the poll. This is done to me. The next move was a massive campaign on social media, WhatsApp, which is, for most of the population, the poor population, they have phones. They don't read newspapers, don't have television. An incredible campaign of venomous lies and vilification.
So, Hassan, the next time you're going to do a segment on Brazil, maybe you should take care of this. And I'm gesticulating over my phone because that's a tool that you could use to read an article in almost any major news service, even in Europe, as an example, or to find the letters from MPs in Britain or former European heads of state like Francois Hollande or congressional leaders, or God forbid you read something in a good site like Brazil Wire to actually know what's happening in the most pivotal country in Latin America that just elected a fascist on top of imprisoning Lula in a totally obscene political way. And, a little hipster noting of American hypocrisy does not a whitewash of a U.S.-backed political imprisonment make. Does not make good. All right, we got to go to the post game. Brendan's staying with us. Yes.
I just want to say that if Obama's going to go to jail for anything, it's going to be avoiding taxes on producing abducted in plain sight, because which was obviously a psyop to make Mormons look stupid to get back at Mitt Romney just years later. Just Obama's a petty guy.
Petty. Keep it petty, baby. Mormons are dumb as fuck.
They are, dude.
Trying
oh my
to do
god,
that white Muslim shit. Fuck out of here.
I don't want to get into tropes.
All right.
That show is deeply upsetting.
We love our Mormon brothers and sisters. In the post game, we're going to eat the pail. It's coming. We've got some sound to get to. We're running tight on time, and we've got to debunk with Ben Burgess, but we're going to eat the fucking pail. I'm not sure how many questions and calls we'll get to because we do have a lot to get to. We obviously ran long, but it's all good. We appreciate all of you. Patreon.com/TMBS. This weekend, Think Tank on capitalist realism, the collapse of our imaginations, psychedelics, meditation, social change, Jeff Bezos in space. It was fascinating. The following week, we're off, but we're releasing some stuff on the iTunes feed. And then for patrons, Rob Larson, Capitalism versus Freedom. Thanks, everybody.